still there across western Scotland and Northern Ireland, although some sun will come through later in the day. And there's another area of cloud and rain waiting to come in for Monday night. Initially that's light and patchy, but the breeze will pick up, and by midnight I think some more persistent damp weather arrive into Lewis and Harris, perhaps affecting western parts of Northern Ireland by this stage as well. Clear spells elsewhere, but whether you've got the clear spells or the low cloud, I think temperatures will stay at 15 or 16 Celsius. A muggy night to come for many. But it's a bright start to Tuesday, plenty of fine weather out there. One exception, once again, northern and western Scotland, Northern Ireland, thicker cloud here, outbreaks of light rain at first. And as that cloud drifts its way eastwards, we could see some heavier rain developing for northeast Scotland and some showers for northern England. Further south, the heat intensifies, 28 or 29 Celsius, 30 degrees by Wednesday.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the final week to see how you could win big this summer. First, there's a fabulous £15,000 in tax-free cash to ensure this summer is special. What would you spend that on? Next, you'll also receive the latest iPhone 15 and a set of Apple AirPods. And finally, £500 to spend at your favourite UK attraction. You have to hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win the iPhone, treats and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can also enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
On election night, we are throwing a party.
The GB News Election Night Watch Party will be live from Essex, and you are all invited.
On air from 10 o'clock, we'll have familiar faces from across the channel, entertainment and lots more stuff as we keep our eye on all the results as they come flying in.
If you want to join our live Election Night Watch Party audience, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com/election party.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark Dolan, and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Monday, the 24th of June. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
We'll be hearing from Nigel Farage very shortly. He's addressing voters in Kent.
This all comes as the Reform UK leader is attacked by Boris Johnson for claiming that the West provoked Russia into invading Ukraine. But is Boris right? After all, he is actually on record making quite similar claims during the Brexit campaign.
And Labour reveals how it will make the gender transition process easier, as well as doing away with guidelines which ban the teaching of transgender ideology in schools.
Plus, a week on from when 19-year-old Jay Slater went missing in Tenerife, we'll hear how the rescue teams have changed the focus of their search.
And of course, throughout this programme, we want to hear from you. Your views are incredibly important. gbnews.com/your say is the way to get in touch. And the question we're asking is, was Boris Johnson right to dive in on this Nigel Farage Ukraine debate that we've seen over the weekend?
Yes, I mean, he's absolutely slammed him. He said on social media what Nigel Farage said, a potential provocation from the West in terms of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Boris Johnson said, "This is nauseating, hysterical drivel and more Kremlin propaganda. Nobody provoked Putin," Johnson says. "Nobody poked the bear with a stick." And he goes on. So essentially, he's come out and said that Nigel Farage is ahistoric and also a Putin apologist. So what do you make of that?
Strong words, but also it's quite interesting that this row seems to be being fanned from both sides. Nigel Farage keeps talking about it, other people keep talking about it. I wonder, is this really the top priority that people have when going into the polling stations in a week on Thursday? It's getting that close. Or are people more likely to be voting on the economy, the levels of tax, immigration? Is Ukraine really the highest issue here? Why is there so much focus?
Yes, I wonder, maybe will it turn people on or off to Nigel Farage? But yes, let us know what you make of Boris Johnson diving straight in head first. gbnews.com/your say is the way to get in touch, but it's your headlines with Sophia.
Emily, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 12. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Your top story this hour: Britain's next government will need to make big decisions over taxes and the size of the state, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Unveiling its analysis of the major parties' manifestos this morning, the think tank said public services are struggling despite near record high taxes. But Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says Britain can do better.
Don't accept the forecasts that say we can't do better than this. The economy has flatlined for 14 years. That is exactly what we are wanting to change. That's why we've set out our plans for growth in our manifesto. So the choice is more stagnation, as we've seen for the last 14 years, which hasn't done our country any good, or turn the page, rebuild, regrow our economy and create wealth so that across Britain people feel better off.
Meanwhile, in Northern Ireland, the Democratic Unionist Party has launched its manifesto. Speaking at the launch, DUP leader Gavin Robertson said every vote counts.
The publication of our manifesto marks 10 days to polling day. And make no mistake, the outcome of this election will matter. The Democratic Unionist Party has the strength and the depth to be able to unashamedly make the case for Northern Ireland. We go to Parliament and we make that case on your behalf. The DUP has an experienced track record of working for you on the issues that matter, whilst others talk about delivery.
Now, a senior member of the Conservative Party has criticised calls to suspend 2 candidates accused of betting on the election. Chris Heaton-Harris says it amounts to suggesting they're guilty until proven innocent. It comes after former Minister Tobias Ellwood called on Rishi Sunak to suspend those involved. But the Northern Ireland Secretary insisted that while one of the candidates admitted to placing a bet and accepted that it was wrong, the investigation is still ongoing and facts must be determined.
Gambling Commission are looking into the betting scandal. They've issued a statement over the weekend that says they're investigating it. They are not going to confirm or deny names, and they're not going to comment further while the investigation goes on. Rishi Sunak has said himself that if anybody's found guilty in that investigation, they'll be thrown out of the party. I don't think it can be much clearer than that.
But Labour Shadow Health Minister Wes Streeting says the Prime Minister has shown a lack of leadership.
Rishi Sunak is the only person in this country who knew for certain when the election date would be and who he chose to share that information with. We already know that one of his closest parliamentary aides placed a bet and he has accepted that and he's apologised for that. But from the Prime Minister, we've seen a total weakness and lack of leadership. And to now try and suggest that somehow we're doing something wrong by asking for transparency in an election campaign, I think people should start to question, what is it the Conservatives have to hide, and why are they so desperate to hide it?
In other news, convicted murderer Lucy Letby has told a jury she never intended or tried to harm any baby in her care. The 34-year-old is on trial at Manchester Crown Court, accused of attempted murder of a baby girl at the Countess of Chester Hospital in 2016. It comes after she was convicted last August by another jury of the murders of 7 babies and the attempted murders of 6 others. Russia's Dagestan region is beginning 3 days of mourning after gunmen killed 19 people, including several police officers. The attacks took place in synagogues and churches yesterday morning across 2 cities in the North Caucasus. The region's governor says the organisation and motive behind the attack is known, but he didn't provide any details. Yesterday's bloodshed comes 3 months after 145 people were killed in a shooting at a concert hall near Moscow, which was claimed by the Islamic State group. No one has claimed responsibility for this latest attack. And the search for missing British teenager Jay Slater is continuing on the Spanish island of Tenerife. The 19-year-old disappeared while on holiday last Monday. Yesterday, police were searching a village near the last location his phone was traced to, but no sign of him has been found. Jay has not been heard from since calling one of his friends, telling her he was lost, his phone was running out of battery and he needed water. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past 12. Now, Nigel Farage is back on the campaign trail today. He's making a speech in Maidstone this afternoon, and we're going to be dipping in to when Nigel starts speaking in just a few moments' time.
Yes, he says he's giving the most important campaign speech yet. So he'll be on very shortly. There's the warm-up act, I think, what we're seeing right now, but this will be Nigel Farage. His most important campaign speech so far, he says.
Goodness me. Well, what on earth could he say? Of course, we'll bring it to you when it happens. But it comes as the Reform UK leader is accused of spreading Kremlin propaganda by Boris Johnson, who criticised Mr Farage's claim that the West provoked the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Yes, very interesting. Will he address that, or will he decide that actually he's had enough of talking about Russia and Ukraine and NATO and the like and move on? We shall see, but we'll bring you that speech live. But before that, let's cross to our political editor, Christopher Hope, who's been with the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, in Edinburgh for the Scottish Tories' Manifesto launch. Christopher, I understand you have some news for us regarding this betting scandal.
Yeah, hi Tom, hi Emily, that's right. Yeah, it's been an issue here, of course, with these bets on July the 4th. We know there are 2 candidates and 2 officials of the party who are implicated in it, and also a policeman. The problem the PM has got is he can't get ahead of it because it's an independent inquiry by the Gambling Commission. Now he says, the Prime Minister, just to us up here in Edinburgh, just after the launch of the Scottish Tory Manifesto, that he has ordered his party to do an internal investigation, and any evidence they find will go straight to the Gambling Commission. This means that if they find evidence of people betting on the July 4th date, then a party can then act to suspend candidates or anybody else, in fact. So I asked him for GB News, why can't you get ahead of it now and deal with the people? At least one candidate has admitted gambling, but he said he can't do anything yet until they've found out the evidence, so he's now investigating himself as a party. We also asked him personally, have you ever bet on politics? He said no. And have your family ever bet on the July 4th date? He said no. He was unaware of any other candidates who have bet in this way. So he's trying to get ahead of it by having his own internal investigation and get ahead of the Gambling Commission, because until that point, he's going to get asked repeatedly by journalists, why can't you suspend these people? What's going on? I'm hearing from a lot of people on the front line, at least one MP who had a very large majority in the last Parliament. He's saying that this betting scandal gate, whatever you might call it, is cutting through on the front line. It's being raised by people who normally wouldn't raise it, and the concern now is in some seats it's helping reform.
Really interesting stuff, Chris. I was looking at a YouGov poll over the weekend that showed of all of the stories people associate with the general election, it's the betting scandal that cuts through above any other story. More people have heard of it than any other story over the weekend. Do you get a sense that the Tories are panicking about it or just hoping that it will go away?
Well, it's not going away. We had a chat with the Prime Minister afterwards. I think there were 6 people asking questions. 5 of them all asked about this betting issue. So that means they know this in number 10. It's day 5 of this story first breaking in a big way. It's important that they get ahead of it. The way of doing that is doing your own inquiry internally and acting on evidence you find internally and passing that to the Gambling Commission, because they can't put any pressure on the Gambling Commission to come to an early resolution before polling day, Thursday next week. I think there was a slight misstep by Labour. Pat McFadden, who's the shadow Cabinet Office Minister, he wrote to the Gambling Commission urging them to publish names of people who you're investigating. And I think that hasn't really worked. It looks like Labour is now putting pressure on the Gambling Commission, and arguably leaving them to do their work is as damaging to the Tory party, because no one can touch it. It's an independent body. I think by doing this, there's an opportunity here, I think, for Rishi Sunak and the Tories to get ahead of the story and try and act quickly and stop it being an issue on the doorstep.
I suppose the Conservatives will be a little bit happy that there's been quite a lot of attention on Labour's policy with regards to transgender people. They probably would think that's a good thing, no? It may well be wider than the 4 people that we know about.
I think they would think that's a good thing. We never got round to asking the Prime Minister about that, because this other issue is currently the thing they've got to deal with. But no question, I think the Tories would feel in the right place with those reforms announced before the election by the government there, about ensuring that you can't teach gender ideology in schools. And that's now been open to a review by Bridget Phillipson, the Shadow Education Secretary, which I think is a place where the Tories want to be. They can say, well, we will ensure that children aren't exposed to this radical thought at school, and they can make sure that children can not be taught things they shouldn't be at a young age.
Well, Christopher Hope, thank you very much for joining us there live from Edinburgh. Let's cross now to political commentator Benedict Spence, joining us now as we're still awaiting Nigel Farage's big campaign speech. But Benedict, this betting scandal is very interesting. I've been looking at this YouGov polling over the weekend. Only 2 stories in this election campaign have cut through with the public more: the death of Michael Mosley and the Prime Minister's abscondment from the last D-Day event. It's not looking good.
It's not, although I think we should probably say that as we get closer to polling day, major scandals are more likely to take front and centre stage, simply as minds begin to be focused a little bit more. Not that this isn't a very serious thing, obviously it is, although if one were being a little bit cynical, one might say, well, it's not as if it's going to lose them much support that they haven't already lost. And there's also, of course, people asking, well, why is it that Rishi Sunak hasn't suspended the people involved? To which, of course, again, the slightly sardonic response is, well, they're going to be out of a job in a couple of weeks anyway. But undoubtedly, it just gives the impression of a party that wasn't prepared, first and foremost, for the election, which I don't think is news. Everybody sort of understood that this was called slightly on the hoof against the advice of other senior members of the party machine, but also that people within CCHQ have not really taken this seriously. And it sort of reinforces the view, I think, that a lot of people have, which is that far too many people in the Conservative have treated politics like a parlour game, actually, that they don't think, first and foremost, not even about what's in the best interests of the country, but, you know, you're thinking about what exactly is it that one does when one puts a £100 bet on something. It's about your personal dopamine hit. It's about getting one over on the bookie. It's about scoring the most minuscule of wins, which in the privacy of you and a betting app, fine, doesn't really matter. But of course, when everybody else sees that and they think, this was supposed to be top secret, it was supposed to be highly organized, and it is about the future direction of the entire nation. And what was the first response of XYZ number of people? It was to go after their dopamine hit. That doesn't really speak to these people being serious political operatives.
And Benedict, interested to get your view. We're waiting for Farage to take to his lectern, take to the stand to make his big speech. Interested to get your thoughts on the row now between Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage over his comments regarding NATO and Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, so I'm sorry to any of your viewers who are, tuning in at this moment hoping to see Nigel Farage. I know I'm a bit of a letdown by comparison, but, it's, I think, What I would say in response to this story is, everybody accepts today that the Versailles Treaty played an integral role in the rise of Nazism in Germany. That was as true in 2019 as it was in 1919. It was also true in 1939. That doesn't mean it was an opportune moment to use it as a political talking point in 1939. And I think that this is the trap, really, that Farage has fallen into. Whether or not there is merit to what he said, and of course we have to remember Boris Johnson in the past, in 2016, criticised the European Union and others.
Benedict, we're going to interrupt you and go straight to Nigel Farage speaking now in Maidstone.
Midsummer's Day. This constituency has very fond political memories for me, because the Member of Parliament here from 1950 until 1987 was called Sir John Wells. And later on in life, Sir John came to see me. He'd been very pro the common market, very pro the EEC, and he came to see me late in life and said, I think I've made a terrible mistake, and I want to correct it. And Sir John joined me as a member of UKIP. So that was one good start. But then, of course, from 1987, somebody else was the Member of Parliament for Maidstone, and she's quite well known, isn't she? Famous for Strictly Come Dancing, famous for being unafraid of pretty much anything or anybody, and actually, I think she's something of a national treasure. And isn't it great that Anne Widdecombe is so pro-Reform UK? Now, this whole campaign, I've been talking about the things that matter in life. Family, community, and country. And so, I want to make a little announcement about family. Yesterday was June the 23rd, the 8th anniversary of Brexit. June the 23rd is Brexit Day. It's worthy of celebration. But it was also, yesterday, my first grandchild was born. So I don't think I'm ever going to forget when his birthday is or when the Brexit anniversary is. You might have noticed that we're doing rather well. There is a momentum. We are the subject of conversation around the family breakfast table. There's more conversation about reform, about me, I guess, than there is anything else going on in this campaign. I guess that's partly because Sunak and Starmer are simply so monotone, so dull, so boring, and don't say anything particularly believable. But it's also because, as the new kids on the block, we've stunned everybody just how quickly we've leapt, and on Friday we saw the first opinion poll putting us on 20%, and it was the fourth poll in 3 days that had us lying in second place across the entire United Kingdom. Now, I remember back in 2014 when I led UKIP into the European elections, and we were doing rather well. And suddenly, certain newspapers started to become pretty unpleasant. And it went on for week after week after week. And I got a letter in very spidery handwriting from a man who said, Dear Mr. Farage, not yet, Dear Mr. Farage, he said, I was in Bomber Command during World War II, and let me tell you, you only start taking heavy flak when you're getting near the target. I think you must be doing very well. And so it's been for the last few days. What appeared after the BBC interview with Nick Robinson, and by the way, I was alone. I was the only person in 2014 who said there will be a war in Ukraine. I can't take those words away, and nor would I want to. The fact that I was more far-sighted than the rest of our political leaders is not something that I'm going to apologise for. And yet this has been turned into Farage makes outrageous statement. Farage defends Putin. Well, I've done none of those things. I would never, ever defend Putin and think his behaviour in Ukraine and elsewhere has been reprehensible. But if we're going to think towards a peace at some time in the not too distant future, perhaps it might be helpful to understand what went wrong in the first place. Our leaders have no knowledge of history. Our leaders had no knowledge of Russian psychology. And none of this justifies what he's done. And who knows, he may have done it anyway, but we gave him to give his people a reason for doing so. And you think I'm on my own in thinking this? No, the Pope in 2022, it's not often the Pope and I are on the same side of any debate particularly. I'm a bit more Henry VIII, you know. But the Pope made this point in 2022. George Kennan, who for years was Director of Policy in the US State Department, begged and urged the Clinton administration not to make the mistake of creeping ever eastwards. George Robertson, the former Secretary General of NATO, said a few months ago that the EU's accession agreement to Ukraine was a mistake that was used by Putin. But no, it's me. I'm the bad guy, and I'm all over the front page of the Daily Mail for daring to stand by what I said all those years ago. And overnight, their most famous columnist, no doubt their best paid columnist, a man called Boris Johnson, has said that I am morally repugnant for suggesting this might have been a causal factor in this appalling war that has now got perhaps nearly 1 million dead and wounded and shows no sign of changing. Well, let's have a little look at something, guys, shall we? Here is Boris Johnson. Daily Mail, are you watching? Here is Boris Johnson from 2016. This is what Boris said. Boris blames the European Union for war in Ukraine. The former mayor is called a Putin apologist after challenging Brussels expansionism. Well, perhaps it's Boris Johnson that's morally repugnant and not me, I don't know. But can you see the sheer level of hypocrisy? Can you see the nonsense of all of this? And let's be clear, this man will go down as the worst Prime Minister of modern times, a man who betrayed an 80-seat majority. Who opened the door to mass immigration? Boris Johnson. Who betrayed the will of Brexit voters? It was Boris Johnson. He pretended to be a Conservative, but he governed as a Green. He put in place net zero policies, including an ambition to turn 30% of our agricultural land into complete grow wild set aside. A net zero policy that meant the poorest in society had to pay too much. And I cannot stand the cant, the lies, the hypocrisy of these people who say things one year and then completely change it the next. What you'll always get with me is thoughtful, considered, consistent political leadership. But perhaps something very important comes out of this attempt to somehow stitch me up, which, by the way, is not going to work. But perhaps something very important comes out of it, and maybe these are the most important things I'll say in the entire general election campaign. There has been virtually no debate on defence whatsoever, other than a ludicrous, we're going to bring back national service, which would only apply to 30,000 young people who would join the military for a year. There's been precious little debate on defence, precious little debate about the state of our armed forces, precious little debate about how little we still do in this country for our veterans, and precious, almost no debate on foreign policy. And I say these things this morning to you because I have no doubt that the world is in a more dangerous place right now than it's been at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis over 60 years ago. A couple of years back, we would have thought war on a global scale was inconceivable. But we now all, don't we, harbour that doubt and that worry at the back of our minds. Since 2010, this Conservative government has relentlessly driven down the ability of our Army, our Air Force and our Navy. They have cut it back to the most stunning degree. We now have at 72,000 fewer soldiers than at any time since Queen Anne, and recruitment is going wrong. We only reached the 2% as demanded as a NATO member by fiddling the figures and putting our intelligence spending in with our military spending. We don't need 30,000 young men and women to do 1 year's training with the Army. We need 30,000 at least young men and women to join the Army, get trained and stay as full-time soldiers. And let's stop conning ourselves that somehow increasing expenditure to 2.5% by 2030, the Conservatives pledge, and Labour sort of matching it, let's not con ourselves that that's sufficient. It isn't. If there's one area where we need increased spending up to 3% of GDP, it is defence, and we need to do it as quickly as possible. And this matters because without the Americans, NATO is nothing. And the Americans increasingly think that we are not a serious player. They've always had the highest regard for all of our forces, especially, it has to be said, our special forces. But unless we start to build up our size, America will stop taking us seriously, NATO will stop taking us seriously, and the world will be a more dangerous place. You don't get peace through weakness. You get peace through strength. You get peace through deterrence, and that matters. I hardly need to tell you the catastrophic failures we've seen under President Biden. The withdrawal from Afghanistan, the handing of it back over to the Taliban after 20 years was the sign of weakness that was seen by Putin, the sign of weakness that is increasingly being seen by China, or China, as a friend of mine calls it. And of course it was the Abraham Accords, those incredible series of deals that were done between Israel and Arab states, something that happened towards the end of the last presidential term, something that Saudi Arabia was about to join, that has led directly to the attacks that we've seen on October the 7th and the awful things that are going on in the Middle East ever since. We have a war in Ukraine. We have a war in the Middle East, and who knows, potentially China will go for Taiwan. This is a very dangerous cocktail, and foreign policy matters. And I will not be lectured. I will not be lectured to by the Daily Mail, and I will not be lectured to by the Conservative Party, and least of all, I will not be lectured to by Sir Keir Starmer. Starmer, who chose to weigh in against me over the weekend. This is the same Starmer that backed Corbyn a man that wanted us to leave NATO. So no thank you. This the same Starmer that wants to reopen the inquiries that go back 50 years against British soldiers in Northern Ireland. And this the Starmer, along with David Lammy, who wants us to join the European Defence Union. He wants us to get closer with the European Union in terms of our military strategy, which would be a disaster as far as America and NATO are concerned. So I'll take no lectures from any of them. And just think what they've done. Think of the lies we were given over going to war in Iraq. Plain, outright lies.
And we've been listening to Nigel Farage at a major campaign event in Maidstone in Kent, accompanied by an enormous printout of the front page of the newspaper with Boris Johnson's words over Ukraine.
Yes, he accused Boris Johnson of being the worst ever Prime Minister in modern history and a hypocrite. As well. But we've got some breaking news. That's why we're coming off the speech. We've got some breaking news to bring you from Princess Anne, the Princess Royal. She has sustained minor injuries and concussion following an incident on the Gatcombe Park estate yesterday evening. She remains in a Bristol hospital for observation. There is a statement from Buckingham Palace. They've said, to reiterate, she has sustained minor injuries and concussion following this incident on the Gatcombe Park estate yesterday evening. Her Royal Highness remains in Southmead Hospital, Bristol, as a precautionary measure for observation and is expected to make a full and swift recovery.
They continue. The King has been kept closely informed and joins the whole royal family in sending his fondest love and well wishes to the Princess for a speedy recovery. Now, of course, Princess Anne is one of the most senior working royals in the family, the younger sister to King Charles. But, of course, this statement from the palace is suggesting that the princess is expected to make a full and a swift recovery.
Yes, as it stands, we don't know exactly what happened, how she sustained these injuries, but we're told that they are minor and that she also had a concussion. So we'll bring you more updates and details as and when we get them. But for now, she is at the Southmead Hospital in Bristol being looked after and is expected to make a full and swift recovery.
Of course, the observation is very important after anyone has suffered any injury to their head. It's very, very important to make sure that nothing further wrong has gone on. And no doubt this will be a trying time for a family that has had a fair share of bad luck over the last year or two. Of course, the Princess of Wales is undergoing cancer treatment, as is His Majesty the King. And so another royal who is in hospital at this time is just the last thing this family needs, although they are maintaining in this statement that this is only minor injuries. She does have a concussion and is in hospital for observation.
Yes, it's interesting how the palace has taken to giving us updates, to telling the public when things like this happen. Of course, cancer diagnosis, as you say, of Princess of Wales and His Majesty the King, and now Princess Anne, who is in hospital after suffering some minor injuries and also a concussion.
But it is important that this statement says that she is expected to make a full and swift recovery. This is, to some extent, a statement that no one would want to read, but one that contains an element of hope there. There will be big questions, though, because, of course, there are reduced schedules for all of the royal events in the summer season. It is perhaps the busiest time of the year for the royal family, and already you have the Princess of Wales, who has had to cut back on her visits, the King having to cut back on his schedule as well. Princess Anne is known as the hardest working royal. The number of events she attends, the duties she carries on, even at her age, which I believe she's 73 years old. And this will be a blow to what is a slimmed-down royal family in any case.
Yes, that's a very good point you make. Shall we bring in our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker? Cameron, we're just hearing this breaking news about Princess Anne.
Yes, the Buckingham Palace has released a statement in the last few minutes. As you said, I believe you've read out the statement confirming the Princess Royal remains in hospital following the injuries she sustained last night. Now, I understand this happened within the protected perimeter of Gatcombe Park. That's the estate in which she lives. And it's also understood that she sustained head injuries that are consistent with potentially being impacted with a horse's head or leg. So this instance, we believe, involved a horse. We obviously know that Princess Anne is a keen horse rider and horsewoman herself. Emergency services were dispatched last night to the estate, and Her Royal Highness was then transferred to Southmead Hospital in Bristol for tests and treatments to be carried out. Her husband, Admiral Sir Tim Lawrence, was on the estate at the time, as was her daughter, Zara Tyndall, and her husband, Peter Phillips, as well. So she was well looked after. The King and Queen, the Prince Andrew and Prince Edward, were informed last night, as was Prince William, the Prince of Wales, as well. Now, a Buckingham Palace spokesperson has told me that Her Royal Highness is recovering well and is in a comfortable condition and is being kept in hospital as a precautionary measure for further observation. So it's believed to be minor injuries that she sustained, and it's purely a precaution that she remains in hospital. It's thought that, subject to medical advice, Princess Anne is expected to return home later in the week. We don't have any specific details of the injuries she sustained, other than, of course, she's sustained concussion and minor injuries to the head. She is expected to make a full recovery, but Her Royal Highness was actually expected to visit Canada at the end of this week on a royal tour. We believe, on doctor's advice, that the princess has been advised not to fly to Canada at the end of the week, and plans are being examined as to how that particular tour alongside the Canadian government can be rearranged. I'm also told that, of course, the Japanese state visit, which is happening this week, that is still going ahead as planned, but Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal, will not be taking part in that state visit, which, of course, was the original plan. So just to summarise, the Princess of Wales, the Princess Royal is in hospital, having sustained minor injuries and concussion, we believe involving a horse, and she was transferred last night, but is expected to make full recovery.
Going to come as a big surprise to many people who know the equestrian history of the Princess Royal. She, of course, competed in the European Championships in equestrian activities, the 1976 Olympic Games. This is a person who has been around horses her entire life, rides them very competently to this day. Very surprising that you're suggesting there might be an incident involving a horse.
Yes, and I suspect, Tom, even because of this incident, it's not going to put her off from riding a horse in the future. As you said, she is a keen horsewoman, has ridden in the Olympics, and I saw her myself at Ascot last week, proudly presenting trophies to one of the winners there, and she was there a couple of days as well. So, although clearly I can imagine the Princess Royal will be a bit annoyed about all the fuss that's being made of her condition, and I suspect she would also want to be back out and about as quickly as possible. But of course, it's subject to medical advice. But Tom, the elephant in the room here is this is now the third senior member of the royal family in the space of 6 months, which is out of action because of illness or injury. So perhaps it's going to cause a little bit of a headache for Buckingham Palace in terms of the media furore around all of this, but because the Princess Royal is the sister of the King, clearly there is a public interest for us to know about the princess's condition, and the fact she remains in hospital suggests that doctors do want to keep a close eye on her just to be on the safe side.
And Cameron, we've almost become used to receiving health updates now from the palace, from the royal family. It wasn't always so.
No, it certainly wasn't. Whenever there was an incident or illness involving the late Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, it was kept pretty much under wraps unless they were absolutely forced to tell us. There was an incident involving Prince William when he was in school back in the early 90s, where he was hit by a fellow classmate accidentally with a golf club and had to be rushed to hospital there. Again, details were quite sketchy with that. But what we've seen, I think, with the change of a new reign under King Charles, there's been a lot more openness when it comes to Buckingham Palace giving us more details, but also being mindful of the fact that the princess has the right, and any member of the royal family has the right to medical privacy. So they tell us what we need to know without giving any too many details to protect that privacy.
Now, Princess Anne earned her moniker as the hardest working royal in 2022 when it was revealed that over the previous 10 years she'd carried out 11,088 engagements. 11,088 engagements, more than any other royal in the royal family. Cameron, she is the hardest working royal, and this is a slimmed down royal family. There are getting fewer members of this family who are able to carry out the work that the family does.
Yeah, I think you're right, Tom, and I think the princess, as you say, carries out more public engagements than anybody else. Her diary is very kind of perfectly timed, so she can fit lots of different engagements in each day on what's called away days, when she travels to a certain area but packs in many different meetings as she possibly can. But as we get this ageing monarchy and we get this slimmed down monarchy, and with certain members of the royal family out of action, it does look very slim indeed. But what we have started to see over the last couple of months is minor royals helping out when necessary. So when Prince William hosted the garden party in Buckingham Palace last month in May, we saw his cousins rallying around him. So Zara Tindall, the Princess Beatrice, Princess Eugenie, and others. Although they're not officially working members of the royal family, they help out when necessary. And I suspect we'll see a lot more of that as the years start to roll on. But I'm sure the Princess Royal will be incredibly frustrated that she is not being able to fly to Canada for this royal visit and carrying out the other engagements she was meant to do, particularly when it comes to the Japanese state visit. And she'll want to be back on her feet as quickly as possible. And that appears to be what Buckingham Palace is alluding to, saying that it's understood that she's expected to be back home later this week to continue her recovery.
And Cameron, do we know what royal duties she had lined up this summer, where she was going to be, where she's going to attend? Hopefully there will be no issues with that if she does make a full and swift recovery, as the palace statement has said. But what does she have on the agenda?
Well, she was meant to fly to Canada, Emily, at the end of this week, and on doctor's advice, she can no longer fly to Canada. So the Canadian government and Buckingham Palace are now having to work out plans to rearrange that trip. So it's understood they are still planning, the Princess Royal is still planning to attend, but obviously it's going to have to be delayed until she's made a full recovery. And she was going to be helping out her brother, the King, this week, because the King is hosting the Japanese Emperor for a state visit to that country. She was expected to attend a state banquet tomorrow at Buckingham Palace, and perhaps some other engagements as well to do with that. So all of that's cancelled, and you go onto the royal family's website, they publish the royal diary, and you can see where members of the royal family, or some of them, are going to be in the weeks ahead. And I suspect that's going to have to be updated when it comes to the Princess Royal's diary of engagements as well. We're getting close towards the royal family's summer break when it comes to August, and a lot of them obviously go up to Balmoral Castle for some kind of rest time and privacy of their own home, and so they can spend time in private with their family. So the royals were going to start to wind down their engagements as we get closer towards July and into August. But I think she probably did have quite a few engagements planned for another month or so. So obviously that's all going to have to be under review depending on how she's feeling and how quickly she recovers.
Break. Well, Cameron Walker, do stay with us. We're going to be back with you, of course, throughout the programme with this developing news. As we say, Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, now in hospital after minor injuries and a concussion were sustained.
Yes, we're going to take a little short break. We'll be back with you very shortly indeed.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Recent polling suggests dentistry has become the hardest NHS service for patients to access, within NHS treatments still 15% lower than pre-pandemic levels. So a YouGov survey reveals that more than 70% of Brits describe seeing the dentist as difficult. compared with 64% for GPs and 42% for A&E services. One British man, get this, he even took to flying 10,000 miles for dental care, saying the extra time and money spent was far less hassle than trying to get an appointment on the NHS. I mean, it's a sad state of affairs. And a shocking 1/5 of UK adults have also admitted to trying DIY dentistry, including the old trick of tying string around a wobbly tooth and slamming it in the door so it comes out. So, should people be more careful when taking their teeth into their own hands?
That is one of the problems. Obviously, population growth makes it much more difficult for people to access NHS services, but they need to then catch up on the other side with dental services and increase the amount of dentists and access to dentistry, and especially NHS dentistry, obviously.
What's the cut-off age for free dentistry on the NHS?
So it is 18 years old, but there are exemptions around maternity, pregnancy. There's some free care around pregnancy.
We saw some data a few weeks back about the number one cause for child admission into A&E is tooth decay. I mean, that was shocking when I read it.
It's really bad, and what happens is people, kids with multiple decayed teeth, they basically have to be put under general anaesthetic, and then all those rotted teeth have to be extracted under general anaesthetic. Like, if those baby teeth start going crooked, then the adult teeth start going crooked as well. Right. So it is important to look after the baby teeth. It's really important. I think they should make it more central to their policies, definitely.
The People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel. On election night, we are throwing a party.
The GB News Election Night Watch Party will be live from Essex, and you are all invited.
On air from 10 o'clock, we'll have familiar faces from across the channel, entertainment and lots more stuff as we keep our eye on all the results as they come flying in.
If you want to join our live Election Night Watch Party audience, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com/election party.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 47 minutes past 12. Now, Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, has been taken into hospital following an incident.
Yes, she's been taken to a hospital in Bristol, Southmead Hospital, this after sustaining minor injuries after an incident on her estate, including a concussion. She's been kept there. We have been told that she will hopefully have a swift recovery. She's expected to make a full and swift recovery. Now, it's been understood that this may be a horse-related injury. As we know, Princess Anne is a very keen horse rider. So, yes, it's believed that minor wounds to the head could have been a potential impact from a horse's head or legs.
Well, the statement from Royal Communications says that the Princess Royal has sustained minor injuries and concussion following an incident on the Gatcombe Park estate yesterday evening. Her Royal Highness remains in Southmead Hospital, Bristol, as a precautionary measure for observation and is expected to make a full and swift recovery. The King is being kept closely informed and joins the whole royal family in sending his fondest love and well wishes to the Princess for a speedy recovery.
Well, I believe that we have Michael Cole, the former BBC royal correspondent, with us. Michael, thank you very much indeed for joining us so quickly after this news broke. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, in hospital after sustaining minor injuries.
Hello, Emily. Hello, Tom. Well, she has stayed overnight, and I think that should be an indication that this was no minor matter. As we all know, she's quite a tough cookie. And for her to repair to hospital Bristol means that there was a cause for that. As you said, it sounds as if it is horse-related, equine. She does ride around her estate in Gloucestershire. And what probably has happened is that she's come off the horse and she's banged her head, and they've taken the...
Oh.
Well, we're seeing if we can re-establish connection with Michael Cole there. But of course, he was talking about how much of a keen equestrian the Princess Royal is. I mean, it's hard to think of her actually not on a horse. I mean, at every royal occasion, she seems to be riding around. She even competed in the Olympics for the United Kingdom,
First
for Team
royal
GB.
to do so, yes?
Yes, in the
First royal.
1970s, which is really quite remarkable. So it does seem strange, really, that this seems to be an incident involving a horse. But, of course, she is over 70 years old now, and perhaps what was once so very easy to do, to perform, to control the horses that she rides, perhaps has become harder as the years have gone on.
Yeah, it's interesting what Michael said, that this statement actually suggests that perhaps it isn't as minor as the palace may be saying, considering that she has been taken to hospital and they have felt the need to put out a statement even. Of course, we have limited information as it stands, but it is understood that this was related to a horse injury.
And we do know that she will now not be visiting Canada at the end of this week, as had been planned, which is a pretty major change to the travel schedule of the royal family. We don't know if someone is going to be sent in her place or if the visit will simply be delayed, but it is an indication of just how much work these senior working royals do carry out on behalf of the country.
And in their later years.
And in their 70s, still having a very, very busy working day. Princess Anne carried out over 11,000 engagements in the 10 years from 2002 to 2022, which earned her this moniker of the hardest working royal.
But Tom, this is what annoys me sometimes about some of the commentary around the royal family. People say, oh, what do? They just turn up and take a photo or shake someone's hand. There aren't many people in their early 70s, early to mid-70s, who are doing so many engagements, travelling around the world. It is work, it is duty, it is service. It's not a holiday.
And for the brand of the United Kingdom, having a real member of the royal family, having that sort of royal stardust sprinkled upon something, well, that's so much more impressive than an ambassador.
It is, yes.
As wonderful as our ambassadors are, sending a royal will always just have that extra little bit of stardust.
Extra pizzazz. Well, talking about extra pizzazz, we're going to bring back in Michael Cole, who is now on the line. Michael, thank you very much indeed. I believe when we left you, you were talking about Princess Anne and her keen interest in horse riding.
Absolutely, and all these things happen even in the best regulated families, even in the GBNews family. I'm glad to be back with you. Yes, I was just saying that Princess Anne is no stranger to equine accidents. I remember vividly when the Olympics were in Moscow, she was competing in the three-day event in Kiev, as I recall, and there was a very difficult downhill jump, and she came off her horse and was taken to hospital, and the captain of the team, Major Derek Olhewson, had to sort of interpret what was wrong with her to the surgeons who attended her then. So she will be very robust about this. She will have taken it as all part of the sport, and she'll be very, very willing to get out of there. I've been around the world with her. She's always a no-nonsense person in everything she does. And all I think we can do is wish her well for a speedy recovery, and that is what, indeed, the palace is indicating is underway.
The palace saying there will be this, or hoping for this speedy recovery, downplaying, really, the seriousness of this incident. But Michael, you were suggesting that perhaps this isn't as minor as perhaps the palace wants to portray.
Well, I think, Tom, that to have the Princess Royal in hospital, any hospital, overnight, would indicate that it is not a minor matter. Obviously, they had to keep her under observation. With a concussion, you never know, do you? It could be just a bang on the head and you're seeing stars, or it may be something more serious. So I'm quite sure the doctors took the proper, cautious approach to it all and just said, well, stay here overnight, we'll have a look at you in the morning and we'll get you home as soon as possible. The good thing about it is that Princess Anne is a no-nonsense sort of person, and she will take orders when they're given with authority from professionals, and otherwise she will do her own thing. One can always remember in 1974 when there was an attempt to kidnap her, she said to the kidnapper, "No Pygmalion likely," when he tried to pull her out of the limousine.
That's a great anecdote. I'm terribly sorry, Michael. We've run to the end of the hour, but I'm sure we'll speak again very soon. Michael Cole, thank you very much indeed. Coming up.
Yes, don't go anywhere. Nigel Farage branding Boris Johnson a hypocrite and a liar. That next.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome along to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Warm and sunny for many places today, but it's not gloriously sunny everywhere. There's still quite a bit of cloud in some locations. High pressure is delivering high temperatures. The cooler air is out behind this weather front. That is slowly creeping towards us, but generally staying away through the rest of today. As I said, though, it's not sunny everywhere. Quite a bit of cloud over South Wales, southwest England, parts of the Midlands, and a bit more cloud bubbling up further east as well. But generally, it's pretty warm. Nothing exceptional, just compared to June so far. Some of the highest temperatures in the southeast, 27, maybe 28 Celsius. Many other areas, pretty pleasant actually, if you like it warm, in the low 20s, 23 to 25 Celsius. Staying fine well into this evening as well. Balmy summer's evening temperatures in central and southern Scotland still in the 20s through this evening's rush. A bit more breeze across the Northern Isles and the Western Isles, and here the cloud will start to increase. Those weather fronts we saw earlier, they'll encroach as we go through this evening. Small chance of a shower over Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland, but the vast majority staying dry. And it is quite cloudy through parts of England and Wales. That cloud breaking up a little more as we head into the evening, and through the overnight period the cloud should melt away further. It is going to be quite a warm night, some mist and low cloud along the south coast, sticking around through the day today and staying around for tomorrow as well. And there's that cloud thickening in the northwest with some rain heading into the Highlands and the Western Isles by dawn. Quite a warm night, certainly for England and Wales, 15, 16 degrees the low in some towns and cities, so especially comfortable. Another pretty warm and humid day tomorrow. Different feel though for Scotland and Northern Ireland. More cloud here tomorrow, certainly through the central belt and across Northern Ireland. A little bit of showery rain is possible here as well. Turning fresher in the northwest, but another warm one across England and Wales, likely to top out at 30 Celsius. Bye for now.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the final week to see how you can win big this summer. First, there's a fabulous £15,000 in tax-free cash to ensure this summer is special. What would you spend that on? Next, you'll also receive the latest iPhone 15 and a set of Apple AirPods. And finally, £500 to spend at your favourite UK attraction. You have to hurry as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win the iPhone, treats and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can also enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2 or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
I cried, cracking out before we even start. I mean, to see King Charles be so brave, so strong, and you can see sometimes, I think his stomach hurt or he just moved himself. It didn't seem very comfortable, but he was there and he was going to go through it all. And I just thought, you know, he's the most wonderful man. He cares more about us and the people who are there serving him. An extra bonus is Princess Catherine, who looked absolutely stunning. She did look very, very slim, though, but she looked beautiful in that outfit. Little Charlotte is an extraordinary child. When they were coming back, she was wiping the windows so that everyone could see with her hand, getting rid of the rain. She's fantastic. And the other thing that actually got my heart was that Prince William and Princess Anne and Prince Edward were getting completely drenched. They were on their horses. They had to go back after the festivities were over. And I thought we're jolly lucky in this country to have a royal family who will put themselves out like that and really do their very best for the nation. No, nobody ever does, and that's why our royal family is the one that's most popular. I do have to say, and just a couple of words, that Meghan introduced some raspberry jam and some dog's biscuits just an hour before. Don't laugh.
Don't make me
an
laugh.
hour before. I mean, can you imagine that? The desire to be noticed. It's always just before a big event because she wants the attention. I don't think she works it out that other people would do it. I think she works it out that they'll all look at me.
The People's Channel.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Monday, the 24th of June. I'm Emily Carver.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
Now, Princess Anne is in hospital with minor injuries and a concussion following a walk on her Gloucestershire estate. Her Royal Highness will not be able to fly to Canada later this week. We'll keep you updated on this developing story.
They were united for the Brexit campaign, but a huge row has been breaking out between Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage. The former Prime Minister attacked the Reform UK leader over his claim that the West provoked Putin.
And Labour reveals how it will make the gender transition process easier, as well as ripping up guidelines which ban the teaching of transgender ideology in schools.
And of course, through it all, we want your views, we want your comments, we want your opinions, particularly on this Nigel versus Boris battle. GBnews.com/your say is the way to get in touch.
Yes, we had we were watching Nigel Farage live at the top of the show in Maidstone, delivering what he called his most important speech ever. He also announced that he's welcomed his first grandchild to the family on Brexit Day, no less,
yes,
on the 23rd of June.
Appropriate birthday, I mean, my goodness. But quite interesting. Perhaps Nigel Farage is taking a leaf out of Ed Davies' stunt playbook, because not only was he there standing on top of the Reform UK bus in front of a crowd, he then brought out the most remarkable large printout of the front page of the newspaper from a few years back, which had Boris Johnson saying that EU expansion had provoked Vladimir Putin. A similar argument to the one made by Nigel Farage, although it must be said Boris wasn't talking about NATO, he was talking about the EU. Whereas Nigel, I think, was talking about both.
Yeah, slightly different, but I like a prop in an election campaign. It adds a bit of drama.
Yes.
Why not? There hasn't been enough of that, I don't think. I mean, the Liberal Democrat leader has been the only one who's been with the props. You were there with the hens.
Yes, I was there over the weekend with Ed Davey on a farm, picking up hens, being surrounded by swarms of hens. The thing about hens is they really like... I didn't know this. They like shiny objects. So we were standing there in our suits, like absolute lemons, and they were coming up to us because our feet were so shiny, because we shine our shoes, properly dressed. They were pecking at our shoes the whole time. Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were going to say they were pecking at your phone or your watch.
No.
God forbid.
Thankfully not.
But let us know your thoughts on this row between Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage. Do you think Boris Johnson was right to lash out at Nigel Farage? Do you think Nigel Farage's comments were fair, or do you think they are Putin apologism? Let us know. GBnews.com/your say is the way to get in touch. But it's your headlines with Sophia.
Emily, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 3 minutes past 1. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Your top story this hour. Let's recap that breaking news coming to us from Buckingham Palace in the last hour. Princess Anne is in hospital after sustaining minor injuries and concussion. That's following an incident on the Gatcombe Park estate last night. The Princess Royal remains in hospital in Bristol for observation, but she's expected to make a full and swift recovery. The Prime Minister has said he is not aware of any other Tory candidates facing an investigation over allegations of betting on the general election. Speaking to journalists on the campaign trail, he also confirmed that he himself is not under investigation. It comes as a senior member of the Conservative Party criticised growing calls to suspend 2 candidates accused of betting on the election. Chris Heaton-Harris says it amounts to suggesting they're guilty until proven innocent. But Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting says the Prime Minister has shown a lack of leadership.
Rishi Sunak is the only person in this country who knew for certain when the election date would be and who he chose to share that information with. We already know that one of his closest parliamentary aides placed a bet, and he has accepted that and he's apologised for that. But from the Prime Minister, we've seen a total weakness and lack of leadership. And to now try and suggest that somehow we're doing something wrong by asking for transparency in an election campaign, I think people should start to question what is it the Conservatives have to hide and why are they so desperate to hide it?
Britain's next government will need to make big decisions over taxes and the size of the state, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Unveiling its analysis of the major parties' manifestos this morning, the think tank said public services are struggling despite near record high taxes. But Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says Britain can do better.
Don't accept the forecasts that say we can't do better than this. The economy has flatlined for 14 years. That is exactly what we are wanting to change. That's why we've set out our plans for growth in our manifesto. So the choice is more stagnation, as we've seen for the last 14 years, which hasn't done our country any good, or turn the page, rebuild, regrow our economy and create wealth so that across Britain people feel better off.
Meanwhile, in Northern Ireland, the Democratic Unionist Party has launched its manifesto. Speaking at the launch, DUP leader Gavin Robertson said every vote counts.
The publication of our manifesto marks 10 days to polling day. And make no mistake, the outcome of this election will matter. The Democratic Unionist Party has the strength and the depth to be able to unashamedly make the case for Northern Ireland. We go to Parliament and we make that case on your behalf. The DUP has an experienced track record of working for you on the issues that matter, whilst others talk about delivery.
And the Scottish Conservatives have launched their manifesto today with a promise to recruit 1,000 more GP and police officers. The party laid out what it's calling a laser-like focus on real priorities. Party leader Douglas Ross was joined by the Prime Minister at the event in Edinburgh. Rishi Sunak accused the SNP of failing the Scottish people.
Now, the SNP have let down Scotland. Their independence obsessions mean that they've neglected everything else, letting down Scotland's children, letting down this country. If the SNP win a majority of the seats at this election, they will treat that as a mandate to carry on campaigning for independence for another 5 years. A vote for the Scottish Conservatives is a vote to put this issue to bed, to move past these tired and stale arguments and to go forward united and together.
In other news, convicted murderer Lucy Letby has told a jury she never intended or tried to harm any baby in her care. The 34-year-old is on trial at Manchester Crown Court, accused of the attempted murder of a baby girl at the Countess of Chester Hospital in 2016. It comes after she was convicted last August by another jury of the murders of 7 babies and the attempted murders of 6 others. And the search for missing British teenager Jay Slater is continuing on the Spanish island of Tenerife. The 19-year-old disappeared while on holiday last Monday. Yesterday, police were searching a village near the last location his phone was traced to, but no sign of him has been found. Jay has not been heard from since calling one of his friends, telling her he was lost, his phone was running out of battery, and he needed water. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 1. Now, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has defended his handling of the betting scandal engulfing the Conservative Party when speaking to journalists in Edinburgh.
Yes, the Prime Minister has also hit back, claims that his party is not being honest about taxes and also spending cuts down the line. Here's what he had to say.
It's important to remember that the Gambling Commission investigations are independent. I don't have the details of those. They don't obviously report to me. But what I can tell you is we have been in parallel conducting our own internal inquiries and will, of course, act on any relevant findings or information.
Moving on now to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. They are basically saying they've done the calculations to all the political parties' manifesto, and it's basically saying that none of you are giving the facts the full picture.
Oh, I don't agree with that. We have a fully costed manifesto which can deliver tax cuts for people at every stage in their lives, and that is largely funded by making sure that we can find some savings in the growth of the welfare budget, because it's been growing at unsustainable levels since the pandemic. We've set out a very clear plan to reform that, to support people into work, and in fact the Institute of Fiscal Studies acknowledged that last time around, when they said that that wasn't possible, that it was actually delivered, and that's something that the Institute of Fiscal Studies themselves have said. Labour, in contrast, don't think you can save a single penny from the welfare bill, which is already where we're spending more than on transport, schools, law enforcement. I don't think that's right. I want to deliver tax cuts for people, and constraining the increase in the welfare budget is the right way to do that, to support people in work.
OK.
Prime Minister Rishi Sunak there speaking in Edinburgh. But the Labour Party, for their part, have pledged to modernise the gender transition process. The party plans to remove the need to prove that a person has lived as their preferred gender for 2 years before receiving a gender recognition certificate.
Now, the advice was announced by the Conservatives earlier this year and is now due to be reviewed if Sir Keir Starmer wins the general election.
That is, of course, the advice for schools that the Labour Party are seeking to abandon. But let's cross live to GB News political correspondent Olivia Utley, who has been following the campaign today. Olivia, it's strange to hear the Labour Party talking about this. I suppose it's pretty difficult territory for them.
It absolutely is. This is an issue which Keir Starmer does his utmost to avoid at all times. But it has come up again. Why? Firstly, because of this guidance in schools. Earlier this year, the Conservatives introduced guidance meaning that children in schools would not be taught that there are multiple genders, would not be taught about gender ideology. That guidance was due to come later, due to come into force later on this year. Now, yesterday, Bridget Phillipson, the Shadow Education Secretary, was asked if, under Labour, that guidance would still come in. She refused to answer 3 times. She sort of evaded and dodged the question and eventually admitted that it would be under review. She said that lots of the guidance that was put in place is sensible, but some of it has got into needlessly divisive language, I think were her words. So we're going to have to wait and see about this, which is very, very difficult for schools, of course. They've been planning to bring in this guidance. They've been planning the curriculum around this, and now that's all up in the air. And we still don't have a clear answer from Labour either way. The other issue is this issue about gender recognition certificates. Now, as we know, here in the UK and in Scotland too, after a bit of a wrangling with Nicola Sturgeon, to transition officially, to get that gender recognition certificate, you need to have lived in your new gender for at least 2 years, and you need to show proof of that in the form of a utility bill or even a supermarket loyalty card. Labour say that that process is demeaning and they would like to remove it and replace it instead with a 2-year cooling off period. So you could get a gender recognition certificate and then you would be in a sort of hiatus for a couple of years while you think about it. Obviously, that's pretty unclear, quite unclear for people who are transitioning, and very unclear indeed for what that means for women's rights. The Labour Party has said previously that it would guarantee safe spaces for women, that is, biologically women-only spaces are protected. How would that be possible with the Gender Recognition Act being reformed in this way? We are still yet to get a clear answer from Labour on that issue. Keir Starmer was asked about it many times by journalists today. Also, if Rosie Duffield is owed an apology after his apparent volte-face on this issue in recent weeks, and he did not want to talk about it. As you said at the beginning, Tom, this is an issue which Labour would really rather steer clear of.
Yes, and also I've seen shadow ministers being asked about J.K. Rowling's comments. Of course, the Harry Potter author who has a huge following. She accused the Labour Party of abandoning women, and now shadow ministers are having to answer to that.
Well, exactly. This is really, really awkward for the Labour Party. J.K. Rowling has been for a long time known as one of the Labour Party's most famous supporters. She gave, I can't remember exactly the sum of money, but a huge sum of money to Tom Watson's campaign when he was campaigning to be deputy leader of the Labour Party. In recent weeks and months, she has been very, very critical of Labour's stance on women's rights. And actually yesterday in the Sunday Times, she wrote a piece suggesting she would actually find it really, really difficult to vote for Labour. It'll be fascinating to see if other Labour women join her in leaving the party. And I think this is likely to become a really, really contentious issue among the Labour front bench. My instinct is that it's very difficult to sell because of the evasive language that's used on this issue all the time. But there are plenty in the Labour Party, I think, women who are very much of the Rosie Duffield mindset, though they are quite quiet about it at the moment. Meanwhile, there are others who sit very much on the other side of the debate. I think Angela Rayner among them. So I think this issue is only going to get more and more contentious as we head into the election and afterwards, because Labour can evade all it likes at the moment. It can refuse to answer as many journalist questions as it likes, but it will have to make that guidance and it will have to stick to it at some point.
Nowhere to hide when you're in office. Well, Olivia Utley, thank you very much for joining us there live from the campaign trail.
Yes, but over in Northern Ireland, the DUP are launching their manifesto in Belfast today. Should we cross live to GBNews Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie? Dougie, tell us today's events.
Well, welcome to Bangor. I'm just outside Bangor town, a lovely seaside town here, and I'm really here to see what the voting patterns are going to be, try and take the temperature of this, because I've been covering elections for 30 odd years, and this is the flattest election I have saw to date. All the manifesto launches have been in hotels with very thin copies of manifestos, all saying a lot and saying nothing. The DUP came out today. They really were trying to make it into something, and it was the first bit of real fizz that I've seen in politics so far, and they were pointing to all the things they had achieved and how much more they do have to do. But of course, they're up against it in some of these constituencies, because there is multiple unionist parties standing, and where there was a huge majority at one stage, we're now down to what is known as vote shredding. And of course, Gavin Robertson, the leader of the DUP, well, he took to the stand, spoke very well about where his party was going. But on the 3rd of July, the former leader of the DUP will appear in court for those accusations that took him out of the leadership in the first place. So right on the eve of polling, they will have that to deal with as well. So a hard run for the DUP. They have the Alliance Party in areas such as East Belfast, East Antrim and Lagan Valley that will push them hard. But overall, a pretty good manifesto launch for Gavin Robertson, considering what they are up against at this moment in time. And let's not forget that they were in that confidence and supply arrangement with Theresa May back just after Brexit, which of course gave Northern Ireland about 90% fibre broadband out of that deal. But a lot of what went on in that deal didn't actually come to fruition because of ministers, etc. here that didn't want to put roadworks in. So they have a hard sell, but this morning it was a slick enough manifesto launch, and we will await to see what the Ulster Unionist Party and the SDLP do later on in the week.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed, Dougie Beattie, our Northern Ireland reporter there. Now, we're getting lots of views in on Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage. Who's right? Who's wrong? Was he right to, pipe up on this? David said Boris Johnson blamed the EU for Putin's attack on Ukraine and was branded a Putin apologist. Now he has the audacity to attack Nigel Farage, whereas Nathaniel says, I cannot vote for a man who, however unintentionally, has given Putin a ray of hope. The West must present a united front on this issue. But Ox says, of course the West had a hand in the Ukrainian war starting. The elected president of Ukraine was removed in a coup, and he goes on. So lots of mixed opinions on this one, I'd say.
It was interesting to hear what Benedict Spence had to say a little bit earlier on the show, where he was saying almost it's irrespective the policy ins and outs here, the politics is perhaps that a general election campaign a week and a half before the vote is not the time to sort of argue about the causes of a war or otherwise. He gave the analogy that in 1939 was any politician talking about the Treaty of Versailles as Hitler invaded Poland. I don't think they were. They were just talking about how Hitler was a bad guy. And perhaps that's the analogy here. Is it smart politics, really, to be arguing over the cause of a war when actually perhaps there are some more chalk and cheese, bread and butter?
But he certainly doubled down and he said, you know what, I will be consistent on this. I'm not just going to flip-flop like Boris Johnson, he said. That's the accusation. Anyway, does Nigel Farage have a point? We're going to be debating that up next.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
The Princess of Wales has said she's excited by a new report on prioritising early childhood, a cause, as we know, that she's closely associated with.
Yes, the task force findings claim that the UK could reap £45.5 billion in economic benefits if firms prioritise early childhood.
Well, let's talk about this now with our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker. Good morning, Cameron.
Good morning.
I suppose it's characteristically Catherine, isn't it, to say she doesn't want to distract from this report by sort of people talking about her health. But we should start probably by saying she said she's not feeling well enough to come and talk about this in public, but sort of saying she's watching it, keeping a close eye from behind closed doors.
Yeah, absolutely. This should not be seen as a return to work by the Princess of Wales, but I have been told she's A, read the report and B, been briefed on it. But this all stems really from her work when she started being a working member of the royal family, where she was working closely with people suffering from addiction, mental health problems. And what she found is all of these issues tend to stem from a poor start in life, so the first 5 years of a child's life. So in January 2023, she set up Shaping Us, this awareness campaign for the early years. 2 months later, she convened the Business Task Force, so 8 members of big businesses across the UK, and over a generation, that could add, as they claim, more than £40 billion to the UK economy each year. We spoke to Peter Grigg yesterday. He's the chair of Home Starts UK, a charity which supports young families. Let's hear what he said about the Princess's role in this.
She's been a real driving force behind the report and everything it's done. And when we've spent time with the Royal Foundation, what it does, it reminds everyone that this is really important work and early childhood matters, that more businesses should get involved, that more charities are out there for people who want to do more to support families and children. So it's been a wonderful experience.
The People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Okwir, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, Britain. It's 22 minutes past 1.
Yes, now they were on the same side when it came to Brexit, but Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage have clashed, you could say that again, in a row over Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Well, this follows the claim from the Reform UK leader that the West and NATO provoked Putin, saying he does not support Putin, but if you poke the Russian bear with a stick, don't be surprised if he responds.
Well, Boris Johnson categorically disagreed with him, tweeting that his comments were nauseating, ahistorical drivel and more Kremlin propaganda. This is strong stuff all over social media.
Well, even the Ministry of Defence has now released a video claiming that NATO has worked for peace, security and freedom for 75 years, while Russia is aggressive.
Yes, this does seem to be growing in momentum. But does Nigel Farage have a bit of a point? Joining us now to debate this is strategic forecaster Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, who thinks Nigel Farage is wrong, and the journalist and broadcaster David Atherton, who agrees Russia was provoked. OK, let's start with you, Rear Admiral. Chris, thank you very much indeed. Why is Nigel Farage so wrong, and was it right that Boris Johnson, came in there calling him a Putin apologist?
Well, I think there's a confusion of facts and fiction here. I get what Nigel Farage is trying to say, but for once I think his much vaunted communication skills have let him down. I think it's fair enough to say that if you put something in front of a paranoid dictator like Putin, he's going to respond to it. But he didn't need any excuses from Nigel Farage to invade Ukraine. Russia has long wanted to dominate the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea. There are oil and gas resources in Ukraine, vast agricultural resources. There's 41 million people that the Russians want to absorb into Russia. He doesn't need an excuse. And I doubt if Vladimir Putin has even noticed that Nigel has said this.
Well, let's throw that over to David Atherton. I mean, Putin's been grabbing territory since he became president of Russia. He first invaded Georgia, then took Crimea, and then this full-scale invasion of Ukraine as well. Does he really need any sort of excuse from the West at all?
Well, of course he does. No, just because you criticise NATO and the EU does not make you a pro-Putin supporter. I just find all this confected faux outrage, I find it quite gut-wrenching. And really, this really has to stop. No one likes Putin. I consider him to be an evil, vile man. And Putin probably, it was just the excuse that he needed. If I can give you an analogy for the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, where the Soviet Union stationed nuclear warheads in Cuba at the time, and it was robustly repulsed by John F. Kennedy, and we nearly were on the verge of a nuclear war. Now, can you imagine in 1962 if Ireland had turned around and said, "Oh, we're thinking of joining the Warsaw Pact"? How do you think Britain would have reacted to that?
I don't think Britain would have invaded.
Well, I think we might have done. If you look at the Eastern Rebellion in April 1916, we brutally put that down. We were 3 months away from the Somme offensive. So I'm sorry, if Russia, or Soviet Union, I should say, could have had a base in Ireland to undermine Britain, I'm sure Britain would have been provoked and would have had a very strong reaction to it.
Is it different, though, because Nigel Farage has said in the past that he admires Vladimir Putin? Does that change it at all for you, David?
Well, there's admiration. And you call it admiration. I'd probably call it respect. No, Vladimir Putin is obviously a particularly gifted man, clever man in many ways. But I'm sorry, you can still admire something, but still see them as being a nasty person, which I do. And I'm sure Nigel Farage does as well.
OK, let's throw this back to Rear Admiral Chris Parry. Chris, what do you make of the Cuban Missile Crisis analogy here?
Well, it's a different time. Look, I respect David. He does a lot of very good work. I see him on social media quite a lot. But I do reject the analogy because the Russians do have a base in Ireland even now. It's the biggest Russian embassy in Europe, and it's far bigger than it needs to be. And we're not obviously taking action. And of course, in 1916, Ireland was part of the United Kingdom, so it was a rebellion, not a foreign sort of country. Now, look, the point is that Vladimir Putin has invaded a sovereign country on the pretext, as the apologists would say, that it brings NATO closer to his country. Well, does that mean he's going to invade Finland next month because Finland joined NATO because of the Russian threat that they perceive to the east? The fact of life is NATO is a political military alliance. It's a defensive alliance. And people join because they're afraid of Russia. It's as simple as that. If Russia doesn't want to be provoked by the expansion of NATO, it needs to stop its aggressive posturing, its invasions of foreign countries, and its destabilisation of our societies through criminal activities and weaponised migration.
I mean, David, if all of our leaders held the same position as Nigel Farage, would that not weaken us? Would that not weaken us? Is it not essential that the West shows a united front?
Well, surely, 2 points to come back on that one. Surely facts should be discussed. And it's not the first time that Nigel Farage has said this. He said it in the European Parliament in 2014. He also said it during the Brexit debate of 2016. Why the false outrage now? As I say, I think this is particularly confected, and it's pretty disgraceful, just because he's doing so well in the polls.
Sorry, yes, go ahead, Rear Admiral.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, David. I mean, the reaction is totally over the top, and people aren't really listening to what he's saying. The fact of life is he's not supporting Putin. He's not actually justifying Putin's actions. He's simply saying that this person has been provoked. It's like saying, I walked up to a lunatic in the street, and the very fact of me walking past him provoked him. We have to understand that anything will provoke Putin at the moment because he's on a policy of aggressive expansionism.
Yeah, sure.
You could have said the same about Hitler in the 1930s. The fact that we mobilized perhaps in 1938 in response to the invasion of Czechoslovakia, of course it provoked Hitler, but it didn't mean that we provoked him into invading Poland. He wanted to do that anyway. So,
yes, it was part of it. But yeah, of course I support the Ukraine on this one. Just very briefly to answer your point on Finland versus Ukraine, apart from 1941, I think it was 1940-41, no part of Finland was ever really a part of the Soviet Union. But Ukraine was at one time, and there are ethnic and cultural ties between the two countries.
Well, thank you there. Sorry, continue.
The same's true of the Baltic states, David. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, they've dared to join NATO, and they could be the next in the frame. So, we mustn't give any leeway to Putin. And I think Nigel, frankly, regrets how he said it. I think he agrees with most of us that, we want to see the back of Putin and his evil regime. It's as simple as that.
So at best he misspoke.
I suppose the great irony, to round this off, the great irony is that if Ukraine had joined NATO, Mr. Putin probably wouldn't have invaded. After all, that would trigger whatever article it is that we'd all have to defend.
I'm not sure about that because I think had it joined NATO, he certainly would have invaded because NATO wouldn't have been ready to actually throw him out again. So he would have had to have taken his opportunity to do that. I think Ukraine joining NATO was always a long shot. There's no question about that. And it was always a pretext. Let's not be under any illusions here. It was more about grabbing the resources and the people of Ukraine and dominating the Black Sea.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, but Chris Parry and David Atherton, thank you very much. It was actually a really quite reasoned debate, a discussion, an intellectual exercise, which we love here.
Well, this is the thing. You've got to scratch underneath the surface of the headlines and actually find out what people are trying to say. Anyway, coming up, we'll have more on that breaking news that Princess Anne is in hospital, having suffered minor injuries and a concussion on her Gloucestershire estate. That's after your headlines.
It's 1:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your headlines. Let's recap that breaking news coming to us from Buckingham Palace in the last hour. Princess Anne is in hospital after sustaining minor injuries and a concussion. It is believed she was kicked by a horse on her Gatcombe Park estate. The Princess Royal remains in hospital in Bristol for observation, but she's expected to make a full and swift recovery. The Prime Minister has said he is not aware of any other Tory candidates facing an investigation over allegations of betting on the general election. Speaking to journalists on the campaign trail, he also confirmed that he himself is not under investigation. It comes as a senior member of the Conservative Party criticised growing calls to suspend 2 candidates accused of betting. Chris Heaton-Harris says it amounts to suggesting they're guilty until proven innocent. Britain's next government will need to make big decisions over taxes and the size of the state, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Unveiling its analysis of the major parties' manifestos this morning, the think tank said public services are struggling despite near record-high taxes. But Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says Britain can do better. Convicted murderer Lucy Letby has told a jury she never intended or tried to harm any baby in her care. The 34-year-old is on trial at Manchester Crown Court, accused of the attempted murder of a baby girl at the Countess of Chester Hospital in 2016. It comes after she was convicted last August by another jury of the murders of 7 babies and the attempted murders of 6 others. And a court has heard how a shopping centre security officer hatched a graphic plan to kidnap, rape and murder TV presenter Holly Willoughby. Gavin Plum, who's 37, is accused of discussing his plan online, unaware that he was engaging with an undercover police officer. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
$64 and 1.1801 euros. The price of gold is £1,835 and 45 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 8,275 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Welcome along to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Warm and sunny for many places today, but it's not gloriously sunny everywhere. There's still quite a bit of cloud in some locations. High pressure is delivering high temperatures. The cooler air is out behind this weather front. That is slowly creeping towards us, but generally staying away through the rest of today. As I said, though, it's not sunny everywhere. Quite a bit of cloud over South Wales, southwest England, parts of the Midlands, and a bit more cloud bubbling up further east as well. But generally, it's pretty warm. Nothing exceptional, just compared to June so far. Some of the highest temperatures in the southeast, 27, maybe 28 Celsius. Many other areas, pretty pleasant actually, if you like it warm, in the low 20s, 23 to 25 Celsius. Staying fine well into this evening as well. Balmy summer's evening temperatures in central and southern Scotland still in the 20s through this evening's rush hour. A bit more breeze across the Northern Isles and the Western Isles, and here the cloud will start to increase. Those weather fronts we saw earlier, they'll encroach as we go through this evening. Small chance of a shower over Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland, but the vast majority staying dry. And it is quite cloudy through parts of England and Wales. That cloud breaking up a little more as we head into the evening, and through the overnight period the cloud should melt away further. It is going to be quite a warm night, some mist and low cloud along the south coast, sticking around through the day today and staying around for tomorrow as well. And there's that cloud thickening in the northwest with some rain heading into the Highlands and the Western Isles by dawn. Quite a warm night, certainly for England and Wales, 15, 16 degrees the low in some towns and cities, so especially comfortable. Another pretty warm and humid day tomorrow. Different feel though for Scotland and Northern Ireland. More cloud here tomorrow, certainly through the central belt and across Northern Ireland. A little bit of showery rain is possible here as well. Turning fresher in the northwest, but another warm one across England and Wales, likely to top out at 30 Celsius. Bye for now.
The latest GB News travel.
Hi, good morning to you. I'm Jules Buckley. Let's go to Skelbrook in West Yorkshire firstly, the northbound A1. Now that's blocked from the A639 at Barnsdale Bar down towards the Wentbridge North turn-off, keeping back to just after junction 38 at Redhouse. An obstruction on the road means big queues. Issues for the M6, firstly southbound Penrith to Shap. That's junction 40 down to 39, parts blocked and slow due to a bump there. Also on the southbound side, Knutsford 19 towards Middlewich at 18, a lane shut for a breakdown, and that's causing queues. Issues in Nottingham city centre. The Wilford Road is closed between Castle Boulevard to Castle Meadow Road and queuing for a police incident. And York Road in Waterloo in London shut between County Hall and the IMAX roundabout and queuing as emergency services there deal with an incident. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It is 1:37. Welcome back. Let's go straight to Michael Cole, the former BBC royal correspondent. There he is, Michael Cole. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, the news that Princess Anne has been admitted to hospital after she suffered a minor head injury and concussion on her estate. She had quite a bit coming up in the diary, didn't she, Michael?
Yes, indeed. I think she was going off to Canada at the end of this week. I think that was in abeyance. Princess Royal is now, Emily, 73. She'll be 74 in August. And she's no stranger to this. At the Montreal Olympics in 1976, she had a very bad fall and concussion, and she was taken to hospital. And only 3 years earlier, the European Championships in Kiev, as it so happens, or near Kiev, I remember she was coming downhill and she had a very bad fall that required extensive medical attention. Now, she's a pretty tough cookie. We can be sure that she won't spend an extra minute in hospital, that she doesn't have to be there. But it's very sensible for the doctors to have kept her in overnight for observation. It ought to be said that, she is an expert, wonderful horsewoman. At the Trooping of the Colour, as the procession was coming out of the gates of Buckingham Palace, her horse became very frisky, but she brought it under control very expertly. What happened here, it seems, Tom and Emily, is that she and her husband, Vice Admiral Sturt, were going around the estate and they came across a group of horses. It seems that this incident then happened when they encountered these horses. Presumably, perhaps they tried to take them under control and the horses had other ideas. As we know, horses are very unpredictable animals.
Very unpredictable animals, and I would assume very unpredictable and perhaps liable to kick or headbutt or something when encountered by someone like me, who's never ridden a horse and doesn't know how horses behave. But you'd think that Princess Anne, of all people in the world, is an expert in all equestrian matters. You'd think that this sort of thing shouldn't really happen to a former Olympic horse rider.
Absolutely, she would approach with caution. But sometimes, horses can get spooked quite easily. And when that happens, they are a force unto themselves. It happens to experts, it happens to novices. And I'm with you, Tom. I've never ridden on a horse either, but I've seen her around the world performing, and she is absolutely brilliant, as indeed was her daughter. The only other thing I've got in common with them is that the hospital she's in, I was actually once in it for a sprained ankle, nothing heroic at all, at Christmas time, but it wasn't because I had been drinking. I fell over a rock in the carpet. Anyway, that's another matter. The fact of the matter is that they're keeping her in overnight. It's a very sensible precaution. With a concussion, you don't know. You get a bang on the head, you see stars, you're okay. It could be something more serious. But I think the fact that they did take her into hospital and kept her there is a credit to the caution and conscientiousness of the medical teams at the hospital in Bristol.
And remind us of just how essential Princess Anne is in terms of working duties of the royal family. Perhaps you can reflect on some of her greatest hits, her top moments.
Emily, you're absolutely right, because as we know only too well, the King is undergoing treatment for his undisclosed cancer, and that is the same, unfortunately, for Kate, the Princess of Wales. So the ranks of the royals are thinned out, and we saw that on the balcony. Prince Charles has always been very close to his sister. They've always got on very well. They've sparred verbally quite a lot. But he thinks a great deal of her. And she has taken quite a leading role. Her work for Save the Children around the world is highly commendable. I've been on some of those tours and I saw what she's done and what she's initiated. And of course, she was the BBC Sports Personality of the Year when she was a 3-day event rider, and she earned that. It wasn't a sinecure. She didn't get the job because she was royal. She got the job because she was a brilliant rider, and she will be upset by this, but she will take the advice. She will listen to experts, and if the doctors say, calm down, stay here, we'll look after you for a bit, then maybe it could be even an extended stay. We don't know, but she is, as you say, Emily, a very important part of the royal family, particularly in these days. And interestingly, she said to a Canadian journalist before the coronation about her plans for a slimmed-down royal family. She said, well, I don't know how that's going to work. And she poured scorn upon it. She's a very great realist, and quite a bold and a brave woman, as she demonstrated when there was an attempt to kidnap her and maybe even murder her. She fought back, and she'll be fighting back now. She'll be doing her best to comply with the medical instructions and get home to Gatcombe Park as soon as possible.
So right of you to bring up this slimmed down royal family. It's hard to think of how it can get much slimmer. In the last 6 months, now 3 senior royals have been admitted to hospital in various times in the last 6 months. I mean, this is getting to be quite a problem for a so-called slimmed down royal family.
Tom, the great patrician politician, Harold Macmillan said, events, dear boy, events, when he was talking about politics. And I think in royal politics, events take over. You can make the plans, but the plans of mice and men often go astray, as I think it was Robert Burns said, but in Scots. That's what's happened. They're coping. The king, of course, is attending to as much duty as possible, but even he has had to accept that there are limits in what he can do, and he's listening to his doctors. He was planning to go to the South Pacific. He's got the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, which he will go to in Samoa in October. He will make the Australian leg of that tour with Queen Camilla, but it seems that the possibility of going to New Zealand and Fiji will probably be put behind the ear for later. They won't do it this time.
Well, Michael Cole, thank you so much for bringing us the very latest on this concerning news, of course. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, now in hospital.
Yes, we'll be back on the election campaign after this very quick break.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The new BBC Director of Sport, who's a man called Alex K. Jelski, who's downplayed fears raised by sports women about biological men competing in female categories. And he's also called Martina Navratilova, I've got to say, has to be probably the most successful woman tennis player in history, and a very brave woman too. She escaped the Iron Curtain and she came out. And Sharon Davis, he says, are not experts on the issue.
At the same time, transgender US swimmer Leah Thomas has lost her legal battle and been told that she cannot compete at the Olympics.
So Leah Thomas made an appeal to World Aquatics, who have this rule in place that says that they protect the female category, as does athletics and world cycling. And because Leah doesn't actually qualify, because Leah isn't training, so she's not even someone that would be potentially part of the Olympic team. They've just said that, you know, you don't qualify to be able to bring this case. It's been thrown out on a technicality, thank goodness, and which means that, you know, swimming will not have any males beating elite females in Paris this summer, which was particularly good for me, bearing in mind that I now have to be very careful about what I'm allowed to say and not say. We're not allowed to use the words biological male, transitioned male. I mean, just every single possible way that we could explain that the person in the race wasn't a female, and it only affects women. It doesn't affect men. You know, females that identify as male are no risk to men's sport in any shape or form. It's just women that are losing their opportunities. The thing I take the most offence to, and this is very serious, and this needs to be dealt with by the BBC, and this is why I wrote to Tim Davie. In that article, he compared males that are identifying as women in women's sport to Jamaican and Ethiopian females being allowed to compete.
What?
The People's Channel.
On election night, we are throwing a party.
The GB News Election Night Watch Party will be live from Essex and you are all invited.
On air from 10 o'clock, we'll have familiar faces from across the channel, entertainment and lots more stuff as we keep our eye on all the results as they come flying in.
If you want to join our live Election Night Watch Party audience, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com/election party.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 47 minutes past 1.
Well, Well, joining us now is the former Defence Secretary, Liam Fox. Liam, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Really great to speak to you. We'll start with this row, really. It's descended into a row between Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage over Nigel Farage's comments about NATO and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Boris Johnson coming out swinging, accusing Nigel Farage of being a Putin apologist. Do you share that view?
I think that what Nigel Farage says about NATO having provoked the war in Ukraine is completely reprehensible. The idea that there is a moral equivalence between a peaceful, defensive cooperation of sovereign democratic nations, i.e. NATO, and Putin's Russia, which has no real democracy, widespread human rights abuses, has invaded Georgia, annexed Crimea, and is raining down death on Ukraine on a daily basis. The idea that there's a moral equivalence between the two is simply not acceptable. We did not, NATO, the West, the free world, provoke the war in Ukraine.
What Nigel Farage has been doing today in a campaign stop down in Maidstone is waving around a front page of a newspaper, The Eye, which headline pointed to Boris Johnson saying that European Union expansion and the proposed expansion to Ukraine provoked Vladimir Putin. That's something that Boris Johnson said in the past, and now Nigel Farage is making hay with.
Well, I think it was tosh then and it's tosh now. And I think that this is an attempt by Nigel Farage to distract away from what he said. It's a very disturbing and dangerous worldview when you think that we in the West should be allowed to exercise sovereignty, determine how we defend ourselves, determine who we defend ourselves alongside and who are our allies. But according to this view, that people in Poland and Hungary and other East European states should not be doing so because it might upset Russia. There is something very wrong and very dangerous and alarming in a worldview like that.
Liam, turning to this ongoing gambling scandal that's rocking the Conservative Party, this is a story that really has cut through to the public in terms of stories that have come up during this election campaign. You've got Rishi Sunak now saying that there's going to be an internal investigation. This is days after the initial allegations were made. Why has it taken so long?
Well, I think that there are several things happening, aren't there? There's a gambling commission inquiry going on. You've got one of the police men who were involved in it, in supposedly putting on a bet, being potentially subject to criminal investigation. We don't know who else has been involved. The Prime Minister has said, as far as he's aware, no other Conservative candidates were involved in this. And even if people are found to not have been guilty of a crime, there's still ethical considerations to take into account. So I think the Prime Minister is quite right to be having a belt and braces exercise on this, looking at some of those non-criminal ethical issues, if you like, but also being very clear, if you're found to have done wrongdoing in the eyes of the law, you're out of the Tory party without us batting an eyelid.
It's fascinating to see that this is the most now paid attention to story of the general election campaign. Every few days, the polling organisation YouGov brings out a list of stories that have cut through to the general public. And perhaps people who spend their time watching news programmes would be surprised at just how low the salience is for most issues. Most issues really aren't noticed by the public. But over the course of this election, there have been three that stand out above everything else. The death of Michael Mosley, the Prime Minister's abandonment of D-Day commemorations, and now this Conservative gambling scandal.
Well, it doesn't really surprise me because that's what's had the most coverage in the media. And when I'm on the doorsteps, what I'm getting from people is they're fed up hearing about personalities and polls and constant discussions about the result of the election rather than the issues of the election. And honestly, you would think from watching most of the TV coverage, there wasn't a war going on in Europe, there wasn't a global migration crisis, that we didn't have problems in the global economy. It's amazing how the big issues have slipped through while we focused on other things.
OK, well, one issue that is a very, very real issue is the Institute of Fiscal Studies. They're suggesting that we're being lied to in these manifestos. They're saying that regardless who gets into power, whoever wins the general election, we're going to have to see tax rises or major public spending cuts. Have the Conservatives been honest about the fact that we may see tax rises?
Yeah, first of all, people have to realise that the burden of taxation has been high, not least because we had to find 450 billion during the pandemic and 78 billion to subsidise people's fuel bills after the Putin invasion of Ukraine. These are non-recurrent costs to government, so they'll not be appearing in the government finances in the future, other than the fact that they attract interest on what we've already borrowed. And on that subject, you need to also note that as inflation comes down, it dramatically reduces the amount that the government has to pay back in terms of debt interest. At inflation over 10%, for example, the government's having to pay back about £100 billion a year just in debt interest, for which we get nothing at all, twice the size of our defence budget. That's come down a great deal. In December of last year, for example, we paid £4 billion in debt interest, whereas the previous December we'd paid 14 billion. Interestingly, 9.5 billion below what will be our forecast. So I take these forecasts with a pinch of salt. And the other thing I would say about the IFS is it doesn't actually take into account the fact that I believe a lower tax economy with a smaller state actually it leads to greater creation of wealth in our country.
OK, well, Liam Fox, I'm terribly sorry. We're going to have to end it there. We've come up to the end of the hour. But thank you very much for your time, Liam Fox, former Defence Secretary. We'll be back very shortly after this.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome along to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Warm and sunny for many places today, but it's not gloriously sunny everywhere. There's still quite a bit of cloud in some locations. High pressure is delivering high temperatures. The cooler air is out behind this weather front. That is slowly creeping towards us, but generally staying away through the rest of today. As I said, though, it's not sunny everywhere. Quite a bit of cloud over South Wales, southwest England, parts of the Midlands, and a bit more cloud bubbling up further east as well. But generally, it's pretty warm. Nothing exceptional, just compared to June so far. Some of the highest temperatures in the southeast, 27, maybe 28 Celsius. Many other areas, pretty pleasant actually, if you like it warm, in the low 20s, 23 to 25 Celsius. Staying fine well into this evening as well. Balmy summer's evening temperatures in central and southern Scotland still in the 20s through this evening's rush. A bit more breeze across the Northern Isles and the Western Isles, and here the cloud will start to increase. Those weather fronts we saw earlier, they'll encroach as we go through this evening. Small chance of a shower over Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland, but the vast majority staying dry. And it is quite cloudy through parts of England and Wales. That cloud breaking up a little more as we head into the evening, and through the overnight period the cloud should melt away further. It is going to be quite a warm night, some mist and low cloud along the south coast, sticking around through the day today and staying around for tomorrow as well. And there's that cloud thickening in the northwest with some rain heading into the Highlands and the Western Isles by dawn. Quite a warm night, certainly for England and Wales, 15, 16 degrees the low in some towns and cities, so especially comfortable. Another pretty warm and humid day tomorrow. Different feel though for Scotland and Northern Ireland. More cloud here tomorrow, certainly through the central belt and across Northern Ireland. A little bit of showery rain is possible here as well. Turning fresher in the northwest, but another warm one across England and Wales, likely to top out at 30 Celsius. Bye for now.
That warm feeling inside.
It's the final week to see how you could win big this summer. First, there's a fabulous £15,000 in tax-free cash to ensure this summer is special. What would you spend that on? Next, you'll also receive the latest iPhone 15 and a set of Apple AirPods. And finally, £500 to spend at your favourite UK attraction. You have to hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win the iPhone, treats and £15,000 cash, cash? Text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You can also enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2 or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice. Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians in the media, but actually, it's about you.
And we won't forget that.
Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
More than ever, it's important to hear
all sides
as you make your decision ahead of polling day.
We're here for you.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Monday, the 24th of June. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Princess Anne is in hospital with minor injuries and a concussion following a walk on her Gloucestershire estate. Her Royal Highness will not be able to fly to Canada later this week. We'll keep you abreast and updated on this developing story.
And they were united for Brexit, but a bit of a row has broken out between Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage. The former Prime Minister has attacked the Reform UK leader over his claim that the West provoked Putin into invading Ukraine.
And the Labour Party reveals how it will make the gender transition process easier, as well as ripping up guidelines which ban the teaching of transgender ideology in schools.
Well, yes, as always, please do get in touch. gbnews.com/your say is the way to do so. I want to talk a bit about Labour's plans here. They've sort of been forced to reveal their hand, haven't they? More so than putting this out as a big press release, a big press statement. Essentially, the accusation is here, or what they're putting forward, is that they want to make it easier for transgender people to essentially identify as another gender and their preferred gender, make it easier in a way to get one of these gender recognition certificates.
Originally, the Labour Party supported a process known as self-identification, where there would be no medical involvement of any doctors or any panel of lawyers or anything like that, and you could just get a gender recognition certificate if you self-assessed. They've changed their position, but they haven't changed it to what the status quo is, and that's this sort of anonymous panel of doctors and lawyers that must assess you after 2 years of living in the other gender to then get a gender recognition certificate. Instead, they want a single doctor to be the person that can make that decision rather than a panel.
And I must say, I'm not even sure what living in another gender means in practice when it comes to this. It seems to be down to whether you put a different gender on your utility bills or on your library card. I mean, it seems rather odd to me.
To prove that you've changed your name, that you've changed your passport, because you can change the gender on your official documentation without a gender recognition certificate, which is actually a bit of a confusing thing, because sometimes people think that the certificates are about access to spaces, but actually, if you've got your passport that says your gender on it, you don't need the
Well, apparently
GRC
they are.
for
They're
that.
important for prisons and also when you die. But we'll get stuck into it. Also, they want to Labour Party look like they want to review or perhaps even rip up this transgender guidance for schools as well that the government's been working for so long on. So we'll get stuck into that. gbnews.com/your say. Please do get in touch. But it's your headlines with Sophia.
Emily, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2:02. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Let's recap that developing news coming to us from Buckingham Palace this afternoon. Princess Anne is in hospital after sustaining minor injuries and a concussion. She's believed to have been kicked by a horse on her Gatcombe Park estate. The Princess Royal is understood to be awake, but precise details are not able to be confirmed yet due to her concussion. She remains in hospital in Bristol for observation, and she's expected to make a full recovery. The Prime Minister has said he was not aware of any other Tory candidates facing an investigation over allegations of betting on the general election. Speaking to journalists on the campaign trail, he also confirmed that he himself is not under investigation. It comes as a senior member of the Conservative Party criticised growing calls to suspend two candidates accused of betting on the election. Chris Heaton-Harris says it amounts to suggesting they're guilty until proven innocent. But Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting says the Prime Minister has shown a lack of leadership.
Rishi Sunak is the only person in this country who knew for certain when the election date would be and who he chose to share that information with. We already know that one of his closest parliamentary aides placed a bet and he has accepted that and he's apologised for that. But from the Prime Minister, we've seen a total weakness and lack of leadership. And to now try and suggest that somehow we're doing something wrong by asking for transparency in an election campaign, I think people should start to question what is it the Conservatives have to hide and why are they so desperate to hide it?
Now, Britain's government will need to make big decisions over taxes and the size of the state, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Unveiling its analysis of the major parties' manifestos this morning, the think tank said public services are struggling despite near-record high taxes. But Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says Britain can do better.
Don't accept the forecasts that say we can't do better than this. The economy has flatlined for 14 years. That is exactly what we are wanting to change. That's why we've set out our plans for growth in our manifesto. So the choice is more stagnation, as we've seen for the last 14 years, which hasn't done our country any good, or turn the page, rebuild, regrow our economy and create wealth so that across Britain people feel better off.
Meanwhile, the Scottish Conservatives have launched their manifesto today with a promise to recruit 1,000 more GPs and police officers. The party laid out what it's calling a laser-like focus on real priorities. Party leader Douglas Ross was joined by the Prime Minister at the event in Edinburgh. Rishi Sunak accused the SNP of failing the Scottish people.
Now, the SNP have let down Scotland. Their independence obsessions mean that they've neglected everything else, letting down Scotland's children, letting down this country. If the SNP win a majority of the seats at this election, they will treat that as a mandate to carry on campaigning for independence for another 5 years. A vote for the Scottish Conservatives is a vote to put this issue to bed, to move past these tired and stale arguments and to go forward united and together.
In other news, convicted murderer Lucy Letby has told a jury she never intended or tried to harm any baby in her care. The 34-year-old is on trial at Manchester Crown Court, accused of the attempted murder of a baby girl at the Countess of Chester Hospital in 2016. It comes after she was convicted last August by another jury of the murders of 7 babies and the attempted murders of 6 others. And a court has heard how a shopping centre security officer hatched a graphic plan to kidnap, rape and murder TV presenter Holly Willoughby. Gavin Plum, who's 37, is accused of discussing his plan online, unaware that he was engaging with an undercover police officer. His past convictions include tying a 16-year-old girl's hands behind her back with a rope and tape and the attempted kidnap of women on a train with the threat of a gun. Prosecutors allege his history shows that he knew what it would take to terrify and overpower a woman. The trial is expected to continue for 2 weeks. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past 2. Now, we're going to start this hour with more on that news that Princess Anne is in hospital after she was hurt yesterday.
Yes, a statement from Buckingham Palace says the Princess Royal has sustained minor injuries and a concussion following an incident on the Gatcombe Park estate yesterday evening.
Her Royal Highness remains in Southmead Hospital, Bristol, as a precautionary measure for observation and is expected to make a full and swift recovery.
Well, joining us now in the studio is our reporter Charlie Peters. Is this your first time in our beautiful new
This is my debut.
area?
This is my debut
Fantastic
in this
stuff.
refurbed space.
Well, it's an honour to have you, Charlie. Now, this is a serious statement, of course. The palace trying to downplay this, as you'd expect, but ultimately the Princess Royal is in hospital. It has to be relatively serious.
Yes, and all of her appointments for the remainder of the week have been postponed. And we also have some understanding of what occurred yesterday evening when she did suffer those injuries. So, as we understand it, the Princess Royal was on a walk on the perimeter of the Gatcombe Park estate, which is her home. She was there with Commander Sir Tim Lawrence, her husband, and it's on this walk on the perimeter where it's understood that she came into contact with a horse, and that's so far that her injuries are consistent with coming into contact with the horse's head or legs. And from there, she was transferred to Southmead Hospital in Bristol. That's some 29 miles away. In normal circumstances, that's a 50-minute drive, not necessarily the kind of distance you'd want, having endured what's been described as a minor head injury and concussion, but we imagine in the blue light circumstances, got there significantly quicker than that. Now, today, as we've learnt, still under observation, is expected to be there over the coming days, but as we understand it, shall make a swift and full recovery. And what for the Princess Royal's diary? So a trip to Canada postponed. That was on the diary for later this week, but also we have an upcoming state visit from Japan, and there is a state banquet with the Emperor and the Empress of Japan tomorrow evening. As we understand, Princess Royal won't be able to attend that event, but is expected to remain in Southmead Hospital for the next few days. Now,
But when you suffer a concussion, it is normal practice for a hospital to say, we'll keep you overnight to make sure that there's no, bigger issues, really. So this could be standard procedure.
I think it is standard procedure for this sort of injury. And last night, the King and the Queen, the Prince of Wales, and indeed the Princess Royal's siblings were all informed of the situation, understood to be paying particularly close attention to the case and hoping to learn more about what caused this injury on that perimeter walk around her estate. But yes, as you say, Emily, this is routine for such an injury. You want to be particularly careful whenever there is a head injury. We see it all the time in sport, and particularly with equestrian sport, where these sorts of things can happen with unpredictable animals such as horses are. And so with this sort of situation, we do expect a continued period of observation in Southmead Hospital.
And for many, it will be surprising, given how famous, frankly, the Princess Royal is for her equestrian abilities. I mean, competing for this country in the Olympics in the 1970s and the European Championships as well. I mean, it's hard to think of someone who's perhaps knows her way around a horse better.
Sure, she's championed the sport throughout her period as the Princess Royal. There's no doubt about that. All things equestrian. But it does go to show, I think, to the extent to which horses are unpredictable creatures, and even the finest horse rider can come into these sorts of difficult situations. But as we understand, these injuries were sustained, these minor head injuries sustained, while on a perimeter walk around the Gatcombe Park estate yesterday evening. And we also understand that Commander Sir Tim Lawrence did accompany her to the hospital after the emergency services were called.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed, Charlie, for talking us through all of that.
Well, now royal broadcaster Helena Chard joins us now, because Helena, this is going to be very, very difficult for the royal family to sort of plug the gaps. This is now 3 senior royals in the space of 6 months who have come into contact with hospitals and have had to have care.
Do you know, we wish the Princess Royal well. Just to say, she is in hospital. It is a precautionary measure. She sustained minor wounds and she is doing well. She is comfortable. So obviously, you know, her plans have been cancelled, so she will not be attending the usual work that she's going to be doing, and also going to Canada later in the week. But she'll be back very quickly. As we know, we don't know the true extent of everything or how this accident happened, although we do believe it's to do with the horse. We know she's an extremely skilled horsewoman, and you know, as was mentioned, 1976 Montreal Olympics, and she, I mean, and we saw her riding Naughty Noble, didn't we, at Troop in the Colour? I mean, only Princess Anne, Princess Royal, could have put up with his skittish behaviour. But she did incredibly well. We know her. She is known as the hardest working royal, and she will definitely be back. I mean, she has association with over 300 organisations, and I think she's really well known as president of the Save the Children organisation since, I think, the 70s. She does a huge amount. And a funny thing as well, I mean, Zara Phillips, her daughter, says that her mother puts her to shame, in fact, puts both of them to shame, and that she's so industrious, so full of energy. She works incredibly hard, and, you know, she will be back, absolutely, she will be back.
We haven't been told necessarily the full extent of the injuries. We don't know all the details, but we have been told quite a lot by historical standards, haven't we? The palace have been increasingly open when it comes to health matters.
They have. I mean, this is our royal family at the moment. This is, you know, this is what's happened. This is the great thing. I think everybody now is seeming very relatable. King Charles, the Princess of Wales. I think things have really taken a turn with their illnesses, and now it's become the norm. It's the royal family is modernising, and obviously Princess Anne will want to be part of this and is part of this. I don't see this as anything. It's an unfortunate situation that's happened, but I do hear it is minor wounds. We're so sorry for her, and obviously she's 73, isn't she now? And I do feel a sort of that she does so much work. Should she be cutting back a little bit? I don't know. But as Zara says, you know, her mum just is so full of energy that she will never do that. She's sensible, and she gives so much to all her organisations who absolutely love her here and abroad. She is truly a star of the royal family.
No, it really does show the sort of soft power of the royal family, how if a junior minister is going to do a visit to a foreign country, I don't think they're going to quite roll out the red carpet in the same way that they will for a senior member of the royal family. Such great ambassadors for the brand of Britain. But of course, we have had this slimmed-down royal family now for the last year or two. Might actually the idea now be to sort of beef it up a little bit more, a bit more of a role for Zara Tindall, a bit more of a role for Princesses Eugenie and Beatrice as well. After all, we're seeing so many of the small group of senior royals now out of action.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I would say Troop in the Colour, it could have been a flat situation. We saw the Princess Royal. You know, I saw a family united on the balcony. It was a family that was coming from strength, I would say. Yes, there's definitely room. We can see the cousins all stepping up where needed. Zara, Eugenie, Beatrice. And there's definitely room for Zara and Mike, I would say. They're full of energy, and I think give complete energy to the royal family, which is needed. And we saw them all at Royal Ascot. so animated, full of fun, again, united. And I didn't see a royal family that was weak and needing help. I mean, I think they're giving out a really great message. And as long as the cousins are there and they will step in when needed, watch this space. I mean, there's lots of room for changes. And the Princess Royal is definitely part of the royal family. This is just minor wounds that she's sustained. She is so dutiful, as we see the Princess of Wales is incredibly dutiful. I'd say Princess Anne equally so, if not more.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed. Helena Chard, royal broadcaster, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Well, to the election now, because the Labour Party have pledged to modernise the gender transition process. The party plans to remove the need to prove that a person has lived as their preferred gender for 2 years before receiving a gender recognition certificate.
Yes, so the advice was announced by the Conservatives earlier this year. There was various advice, including on schools and gender ideology and the like. But it's due to be reviewed if Sir Keir Starmer wins the general election. We don't know to what extent. We don't know whether it will be completely ripped up. This is something that ministers have been working on for quite a while.
Let's cross to GB News political correspondent Olivia Utley, who's been following the Labour Party's campaign today and is on the Labour campaign bus. Let's hope the signal holds, Olivia. Quick one first on this gender row. What does the Labour Party saying?
Firstly, I should say the Labour Party didn't really want to talk about this. They've been sort of forced to show their hand. There are two separate issues going on here. One is the Labour Party's plan to reform the gender recognition certificate process. Now, at the moment, if you want to obtain a gender recognition certificate, then you need to prove to a panel of gender experts that you have lived in your preferred gender for 2 years. And you have to show them, for example, a utility bill or even a supermarket loyalty card to do that. Under the plans that Labour is proposing, you wouldn't have to do that anymore. All you would have to do is get one expert gender doctor to agree to sign off on your gender recognition certificate. And instead of that 2-year wait, there's a 2-year cooling off period. So you sort of get the certificate in advance and then you can think about it for a couple of years, and you're in a kind of hiatus for that time. The Labour Party actually wanted to go even further than that. They wanted to make it so that a family doctor, a GP, could sign off on that gender recognition certificate request. But Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, put a stop to that because he was worried about the sort of strain that it might put on family doctors. There's another issue going on here too. The Labour Party, or Bridget Phillipson, the Shadow Education Secretary in particular, has said that she would review the guidance that the Conservatives have put in place, which at the moment is stopping trans ideology being taught in schools. That guidance was agreed earlier this year and was going to be brought in later this year. Bridget Phillipson hasn't said what that review would entail. Is that guidance going to be ripped up altogether? Probably not. She has said that the majority of it is quite sensible, but it does leave schools in a bit of a pickle at the moment because they were planning to bring in that guidance in just a few months' time, and now they don't really know where they stand. Let's hope that we hear more about this issue if and when Labour comes into power in just a few weeks' time.
Yes, it's all a bit up in the air, isn't it? But I understand the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, was also pressed on tax today.
Yes, I mean, this has been an awkward issue for Keir Starmer from the beginning of his campaign. He has said over and over again that he does not want to raise any of the 3 main taxes on working people, so VAT, income tax and national insurance. That obviously leaves the floodgates open to all sorts of other tax rises. But so far, what Keir Starmer has said nothing in their manifesto requires any tax rises. Well, the IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, independent think tank, very respectable, well-regarded think tank, has poured cold water on that idea. In their report today on the manifestos accosted.
Oh.
Well, just as we were getting to the meat on the bone of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, I think what Olivia was about to say is that the IFS has been pretty rude about all parties this morning, saying that they're not quite telling the truth when they're talking about the scale of tax rises or indeed spending cuts that will have to come after the election.
And am I right in thinking that they haven't been impressed by the lack of acknowledgement, I guess, of the debt we have as a country? Huge debt. Of course, COVID has made that much, much worse. But, yes, seems to be skirting around that issue, our politicians.
Although, when we were speaking to Liam Fox in the last hour, I was very impressed with, actually, how he had the numbers right in the forefront of his mind. And what often isn't picked up on this is debt interest payments have been huge, of course, throughout our period of high inflation. But now that inflation is coming down, the cost of servicing the debt is coming down too. He was saying at one point the cost of servicing the debt was twice the amount we spend on our Ministry of Defence, which is just incredible numbers. But obviously, now that inflation is now to 2%...
Yes, but he was skirting the issue on the odd tax rises, wasn't he?
He was. But now that inflation's down to 2%, that might free up some money in terms of debt interest payments.
It was. His answer was interesting, but whether it was the answer to the question,
yes,
we'll let you judge. We'll let you judge. But is former Prime Minister Boris Johnson right to attack Nigel Farage for claiming that the West has provoked President Putin into invading Ukraine? We'll speak to an expert for her view.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Giovanni is axed following growing allegations of threatening and abusive behaviour.
We won't see his little toes dancing around the dance floor again, which is a shame.
Was it the BBC saying, you know, we've had some bad publicity about this star, do we need to maybe let him go? Or was it Giovanni himself saying that, you know, he's had to, with all the bad publicity and what's the allegations against him, he's walked away? We don't exactly know. But what we do know is that Amanda Abingdon, who he was coupled with last year on the last series of Strictly, left claiming that she had nasty behaviour from him in rehearsals when they were training for their routines. And she's also been diagnosed with PTSD, which she is blaming or claiming happened because of the training that she was put under Giovanni. It's very sad because I've met Giovanni on quite a few occasions, and he comes across as a very nice gentleman, actually, and the fans absolutely love him. And even though the allegations are out there against him, everybody I speak to in terms of the fans are on his side.
I mean, from the fans' point of view, they don't see what goes on behind the scenes. All they see is an incredibly gifted dancer who we're seeing footage of now.
It might come out later, but there's all sorts of things coming out because after Amanda came out and claimed all this behaviour against him, a male celebrity last week also came out and voiced their opinion. Yeah, a lot of fans will be gutted, but as you say, we don't know the full story yet as what's gone on.
And it's incredible pressure that no one's allowed to be, a duffer right from the start now.
I mean, it's one thing learning lines if you're an actor, but it's a different kettle of fish altogether if you're learning moves that you've never done before. So you've got...
The People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News.
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 26 minutes past 2. Now, the Ministry of Defence has said that NATO has worked for peace, security and freedom for 75 years, while Russia was aggressive.
Yes, this is after Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson clashed over the former's comments that the West and NATO have provoked Putin, writing he does not support Putin, but that if you poke the Russian bear with a stick, don't be surprised if he responds.
Goodness me. Well, we're joined now by the former advisor at NATO HQ and the Associate Fellow at Chatham House, Samantha de Bendon. Samantha, thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, there's a lot of confusion about what NATO expansion has actually meant since the fall of the Berlin Wall. What has that process actually involved?
Well, what it involved is that after the Berlin Wall fell and after the Soviet Union dissolved, a number of countries that used to be part of the Warsaw Pact and also part of the Soviet Union came to NATO and said, we don't trust Russia. We were invaded by Russia when it was still the Soviet Union in the past. We want protection from Russia because we don't believe that this new Russia, which is independent from the Soviet Union, will actually stay within its borders and not want to invade us. And at the beginning, NATO was actually a little bit reluctant to open up this idea of expansion because they were afraid that it would provoke and irritate Russia. And every single care was taken at every step of the way to try and include Russia in a new Euro-Atlantic structure. There was something called Partnership for Peace, which was involving Russia in joint operations to ensure peace and security in emergencies, for instance, around the world. There was something called the NATO-Russia Council, which was created, which would allow Russia and NATO to get around the table and talk together about solving the security problems that we faced together in the Euro-Atlantic space. And in the meantime, what did Russia do? Russia either killed its own people who wanted to become independent from Russia when it completely flattened the town of Grozny in Chechnya. It provoked civil unrest in its neighbors. It invaded Georgia in 2008. In 2014, it invaded parts of Ukraine. And in 2022, it invaded Ukraine in a completely unprovoked aggression. So Russia's neighbors feel insecure and want protection, and they feel the only way to be protected from an expansionist imperialist Russia is to join NATO.
Now, Boris Johnson has accused Nigel Farage of essentially being a Putin apologist. In fact, he used those very words, said he was ahistorical and the like. Is it fair to say that, to launch that criticism at Nigel Farage? Is it OK to question whether there has been any provocation towards Russia at all from the West?
There has been no provocation towards Russia from the West. As I said, the West has tried to incorporate Russia in the security structures. Now, Russia has felt that NATO expansion presented a threat. And Russia has often said, we're now surrounded by NATO. Now, until Finland joined NATO, 6% of NATO territory touched Russia. That is hardly surrounding. You don't need to be a mathematician to know that you're not surrounding a country if you touch 6% of its territory. The second thing that Nigel Farage said, which I thought was very extraordinary, he said, the Russians are saying, here we go again, they are attacking us again. Now, who is the they? Who is the we that Nigel Farage is invoking? The only people who've actually attacked Russia in the last 100 years were Nazi Germany. Now, if he's saying that the UK is like Nazi Germany, then that's a real problem, and not surprising that many British politicians are absolutely furious with these allegations.
I'm sure he'd strenuously deny any implication that that's what he was saying. But it is interesting you talk about this sort of infrastructure that was developed after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the creation of the Russian Federation, almost the sort of reaching out operations that the West did, the Americans creating the International Space Station, so all these rocket scientists could work for something good rather than go off to nefarious regimes, the G8, the NATO-Russian Council, all of this. But what the Russians say, the talking point from the Russian Foreign Ministry throughout this has been that there was something signed in the 1990s guaranteeing that NATO would not expand into Ukraine. What's the truth there?
The truth is absolutely nothing was signed. Now, there were discussions between the then American Foreign Secretary, James Baker, and various Soviet leadership, including Gorbachev. There were then discussions between Clinton and Gorbachev and Yeltsin saying, we don't really see why NATO should expand. But what happened is that Russia then showed that it was aggressive and expansionist, and Russia's neighbors said, we need your protection. Nothing was signed. The archives of those discussions are now on open access. Anybody can go to the Library of Congress in the United States and see the handwritten notes that were taken during those meetings. There was, however, one document that was signed and enshrined in international law in 1994 between Russia, Ukraine, the United Kingdom, and the United States, and that was the Budapest Memorandum. And that document says Ukraine will give up its nuclear weapons, and Russia, the UK, and the US will guarantee Ukraine's security if it is attacked. That memorandum has been completely violated by Russia, and I would also argue that it was partially violated by the UK and the US as well, because we've been very half-hearted in our aid to Ukraine. Here is a Central European country that's invaded by a neighbor. Cities are being destroyed, children are being deported, and we're humming and hawing about what we can send that will not provoke Russia. Every single discussion that's taken place in the West since Ukraine was invaded was about how can we help Ukraine without provoking Russia? How can we help Ukraine without seeing a defeat by Russia? If anything was to have been done to help Ukraine, to really help Ukraine and deter Russian aggression, it has not been done. And Russia knows that. Russia knows that perfectly well.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed. Really great to get your perspective. Samantha de Benden from Chatham House and a former advisor at NATO HQ.
Well, stay with us because we're going to head to Eastbourne just to find out how the sunshine is going down at the seaside. You won't want to miss it, and perhaps you'll want to stay inside watching the television to avoid what is being described as a heat wave. You're watching Good Afternoon Britain.
It's 2:33. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your headlines. Princess Anne is in hospital after sustaining minor injuries and a concussion. She's believed to have been kicked by a horse on her Gatcombe Park estate. The Princess Royal is understood to be awake, but precise details are not able to be confirmed yet due to her concussion. She remains in hospital in Bristol for observation, and she's expected to make a full recovery. The Prime Minister says he's not aware of any other Tory candidates facing investigation over allegations of betting on the general election. It comes after former Minister Tobias Ellwood called on Rishi Sunak to suspend those involved. Britain's next government will need to make big decisions over taxes and the size of the state, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Unveiling its analysis of the major parties' manifestos, the think tank said public services are struggling despite near-record high taxes. Convicted murderer Lucy Letby has told a jury she never intended or tried to harm any baby in her care. The 34-year-old is on trial at Manchester Crown Court, accused of attempted murder of a baby girl at the Countess of Chester Hospital in 2016. And a court has heard how a shopping centre security officer hatched a graphic plan to kidnap, rape and murder TV presenter Holly Willoughby. Gavin Plum, who's 37, is accused of discussing his plan online, unaware that he was engaging with an undercover police officer. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Afternoon. Thanks for joining me here for the latest weather update from the Met Office on GB News. It's fine, very warm and sunny for most, but there's a few zones hanging on to the cloud, parts of South Wales and southwest England. Cloud breaking up a little here through this evening, and further east the cloud also tending to melt away overnight. The cloud is thickening though in the northwest, bit of patchy rain trickling into the Highlands and the Western Isles through the early hours. For most, though, it's a fine evening out there, a dry and it's a pretty warm night as well, with temperatures mainly holding up in the mid-teens. It's going to be a touch hotter for many on Tuesday. Again, for most across England and Wales, fine and sunny, but a different day tomorrow for Scotland, Northern Ireland. More cloud here initially over the Highlands and the Western Isles, but it will spill south. Some early sunshine over eastern Scotland and through southern Scotland as well. But a cloudier day too for Northern Ireland, that cloud thickening up through the night. Some light and drizzly rain in the west first thing. It's a dry, fine start for England and Wales. Some mist and low cloud again along the south coast, just like there has been today. Should tend to clear away as we go through the day. And generally for England and Wales, I say quite a bit of sunshine. A sunnier day, probably for parts of Gloucestershire down through to Devon. A bit more in the way of blue sky here, but clouding over a little over northern England, and the possibility of 1 or 2 afternoon heavy showers here, and certainly clouding over across eastern Scotland with a bit of rain trickling in. Still quite warm here, but temperatures will be a few degrees lower, whereas for England and Wales, many places touch warmer. We could top out at 30 Celsius in the capital. Through the evening, not a great deal of change. Still 1 or 2 heavy showers across the north. They may linger even into Wednesday morning. And again, a bit more cloud in the northeast. Some coasts here could be a little misty and murky from tomorrow evening. But for most, again, Wednesday's dry, probably a sunnier day for western Scotland and Northern Ireland. And again, in the southeast, temperatures could top out at 30 Celsius. Bye for now.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, hello again to you. I'm Jules Buckley. West Yorkshire, the eastbound side of the A64 is blocked between Occupation Lane and the A1M. That's the turn off of York at Junction 44, a collision causing queues. Northbound A1 in the county from the A1M, that's Red House. Junction 38 to Barnsdale Bar, that's the A639 blocked. Queuing back to Red House at Junction 37, an obstruction causing queues. There's a breakdown southbound M6, and that's for Dun to Middlewich, 19 to 18. A little bit slow on the camera. A lane closure in place. Still queuing away from the Sedgemoor services on the northbound M5 past Weston-super-Mare up to Clevedon at 20 following an earlier vehicle needing a tyre change. And York Road in Waterloo and London shut between County Hall and the IMAX roundabout in queuing. There's an ongoing incident. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It is now 2:38 in the afternoon, and guess what? It's Martin Dobney up next. I believe he joins us now. Yes, he does. Martin, what's up?
Loving the new studio. Looks beautiful. Great show. Well, there's only one place to start. Ding, ding. The gloves are off. It's war. Farage versus Brexit. The two big beasts of Brexit brawling it out. Now, a lot of people have gone toe-to-toe with Nigel Farage. Almost all of them have come to regret it. Will Boris, the big dog, regret it? Has he bitten off more than he can chew? I'll be joined by Reform Party UK's Ben Habib for the dust-up of the day. Next up, Michel Barnier there, that man in Brussels. He's saying any future deal the Labour Party does with the EU will necessitate open borders. Well, don't we have them already? Or is this just an indication of how bad things could get if we row closer to Brussels under a Sir Keir Starmer government? And finally, England's footballers. What a bunch of total snowflakes, wasting time responding to Gary Lineker's comments, moaning about mean tweets and Instagram posts. I tell you what, lads, how about you focus on the football, do the results, and actually stop whinging and bring home the bacon? That's all coming 3 till 6.
Martin, a show without any controversy at all, I am sure. Dancing around the delicate issues, of course, as usual. Martin, we look forward to it from 3 o'clock.
Oh, harsh words for the England football team, eh? Just get on with the football, stop worrying about social media. I mean, he's not wrong, is he?
Maybe it's the social media that's stopping them from focusing on the football, and if everyone was nicer to them, they'd play better.
Well, just, you know, turn it off, eh? There's a novel idea. I would have thought if you were concentrating on, you know, an international football competition, tournament, you'd probably just decide to put your phone away for a little while, no?
Maybe they want to unwind, just have a little bit of a scroll on Instagram, and then boom, there they are. They can't unwind because they're being called horrible names.
No TikTok, no Snapchat, no nothing, just football. Anyway, the UK Health Security Agency has announced yellow heat health alerts across most of England this week. Daily temperatures are expected to reach 30 degrees.
So should we be worried or should we be celebrating? Well, a heatwave may be welcome after the cold start to the summer we've had, but these high heats can pose a risk to vulnerable people.
Right, well, let's cross now to our reporter Theo Jacomba, who's outside Inglewood Nursing Home in Eastbourne. Theo, yes, the heat, we're welcoming it, but it can also impact people who are in their elderly years, can't it?
It can indeed, and that's why there is that yellow weather warning, particularly for those who are over the age of 65 and those who are vulnerable. But we've been speaking to people in Eastbourne this morning and this afternoon, and they actually welcome this warm weather. They're saying, finally, this weather has arrived. We've been told it's summer for weeks now the 24th of June, and still no sign of it, but they are very happy to see it finally here. Now, we've been asking people, are they prepared, and if they're carrying water and sun cream just to ensure that they are safe. This is what they have to say.
There's nothing to complain about, is there? We're here for the tennis. It's a fantastic day. Even the sea looks blue, which is quite a surprise for Eastbourne.
Long time coming. Just coming out for a couple of hours, so we're taking a chance without the sunscreen.
Yeah, I love it. About time we had some hot weather. It's nice.
But the weather's gorgeous, yes. Yeah, we've just come down from a place in Enfield.
Loving that. Yeah, it's about time, isn't it? Yeah, summer's here.
Plenty of happy people there, but there is that warning from the UK Health Security Agency that you should be prepared, carry water and have sunscreen with you. Even if you feel like you can combat it, the advice is to ensure that you are carrying plenty of water to stay hydrated. But we are on the first of a couple of days, actually. On Wednesday, it's set to peak at around 28 to 29 degrees, depending where you are in the country. And perhaps in the capital, we may be seeing temperatures around 30 degrees on Wednesday this afternoon. But for those looking forward to later in the week, temperatures are still going to be fairly high in the 20s. So if you are at work and feeling like you're missing out, there is still some warm weather on the way this week.
Theo, are you sure you're in Eastbourne? It looks positively Mediterranean. Particularly that man that you interviewed who was standing in front of what looked like a palm tree in the glistening blue Riviera, or just perhaps ordinary sea. But no, goodness me, it looks really quite marvellous. It doesn't look like people are particularly annoyed, really.
Yeah, you're right, and I have to say it's probably thanks to the local council here who have done what looks like a great job when it comes to the flowers, putting those palm trees. It almost does look like you're in another country with blue seas. Even I was surprised. So yeah, it does look very good over here.
Well, enjoy the sunshine, Theo. Thank you very much indeed, Theo Giacomba, outside Inglewood Nursing Home in Eastbourne. It's normal summer temperatures, isn't it? It's just a surprise because it's been so dreadful for so long.
Yeah, I don't think that we should be particularly worried. Obviously, if you're a vulnerable person, you should take extra precautions, of course. That almost goes without saying. But I don't think we should be too down and out about finally having some sunshine.
Do you think we infantilise people a little? People can tell if it's hot outside. They know they probably need a drink of water.
Yeah.
And if they don't have one, some kind person will lend you a drop of water, I'm sure.
What I think we need a bit more of in this country, though, is air conditioning. We seem to have an aversion to air conditioning in a way that most European countries...
Yeah, because it's not worth it, is it? Because it's only hot about 2 weeks of the year.
I think it's going to become more and more worth it. I think because you know that a lot of local plans, loads of local councils, and particularly the London plan, explicitly discourages new buildings from having
He makes
air conditioning
everything
in it.
about planning regulations. Have you noticed?
Because politicians stop us having nice lives.
They do. They stop you from having a nice life.
Yeah.
Yes. Anarchy. Anarchy preferable for Tom. Just
Absolutely.
joking.
No.
Just joking.
Yeah.
No, if you ran the world, there'd be no planning regulations at all, would there? You'd be able to build anything wherever you like.
I would. Not anyone else.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, let us know if you're enjoying the sunshine. Perhaps you're listening to us on the radio in the garden, enjoying some of that sunshine. Anyway, coming up, football. Harry Kane and Gary Lineker commence a war of words. Could it be a distraction as the England team continue their campaign at the Euros? This is all a bit odd. It's all kicking off, really, isn't it?
Oh,
We'll have
very
the
good.
latest.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
What about the elections? Because it seems that the King and everything is moving because of it, and we've got a lot of royal engagements and things that happen at this time.
Yes, well, it means that he has to take more time and be at home. He can't go to all the things he wants to do. He's been doing 5 a day, which is probably made Camilla a bit cross. But what they still hope is that they can get the Japanese emperor and empress over. That's in July. That they can go to France for the 80th anniversary of the fighting. And he will be able to do 1 or 2 things. And Ascot he's very keen to do. Now, Now, those aren't things that are political in any way. I just want to talk about Harry and Charles's argument, where Harry said he didn't want to stay, he wanted to go to a hotel. And it's come out now that actually King Charles is believed that he was offered St James's, and Princess Anne stays there, and Beatrice stays there.
And this was for when Harry came over for his 10th
yeah, exactly. And the policemen are wandering around with guns, and there's no chance of actually there being any problem there. So the fact that he said that it wasn't safe for him was not actually a very sensible thing to say, I don't think.
Well, he went to Nigeria, and that is, in the world ranking, it's ranked as quite a dangerous place.
Yes, one of the dangerous places in the world. But now Harry and Meghan have been invited to go to Ghana.
Oh, God. Well, it's interesting because my parents are from Ghana. I have Ghanaian heritage, and I'm thinking she'll probably then claim there's a percentage that she's Ghanaian as well. I'll be like, hang on a minute, you were Maltese, you're also Nigerian,
and
now you're going to say you're Ghanaian and German.
Yeah.
Come on. Thank you very much.
Squeeze it in.
Yeah, let's get them all in. Angela Levin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The People's Channel.
On election night, we are throwing a party.
The GB News Election Night Watch Party will be live from Essex, and you are all invited.
On air from 10 o'clock, we'll have familiar faces from across the channel, entertainment and lots more stuff as we keep our eye on all the results as they come flying in.
If you want to join our live Election Night Watch Party audience, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com/election party.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
Yeah, for dartball practice. Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 minutes to 3. Now, here's a surprising story for you. Yes, the Match of the Day presenter Gary Lineker has got himself into a bit of hot water. That's unusual. With a war of words with England's all-time top goalscorer, Harry Kane.
You know, you'll always have me to laugh at your jokes. You'll always have me.
No one else.
After the Three Lions drew to Denmark in their second Euro group stage game, Gary Lineker said, "In all honesty, Harry Kane needs to do a lot better. His movement was minimal. He didn't look to go behind, and he doesn't often. But even when he comes short, he's drifting short very lethargically. He's plodding short, and that's not going to help." It's like he's had a thesaurus out.
Plodding short. It's the first time I've heard that, I think. But ahead of England's last group stage game against Slovenia, Captain Kane has now responded.
Look, I think it's always, I'd never want to be disrespectful to any player, especially, a player who's worn the shirt and knows what it's like to play for England. But it's very hard not to listen to it now, especially for some players who are not used to it or some players who are new to the environment. So, like I touched on, everyone's got their opinion, but the bottom line is we haven't won nothing as a nation for a long, long time. And, a lot of these players were part of that as well, and they know how tough it is. So, yeah, look, I'd never disrespect any ex-player. All I'd say is just, remember what it was like to wear the shirt and that their words are listened to.
Well, there we go. Joining us now from Germany is sports journalist Ben Jacobs. Ben, is Gary Lineker showing a lack of self-awareness here?
Well, I think what was interesting is you had the analysis, and that was about Kane, and then you had Gary Lineker's podcast where he used a slightly more damning word that I can't repeat at this time, and that was about the overall performance. And I think the tone of that didn't go down well within the England camp. Any pundit, especially an ex-player, is entitled to an opinion, and a lot of Gary's points on Kane may be true, but he's the kind of player that doesn't need to be overly involved in games because he's so prolific that when he gets his chance, he tends to take it. And I think the issue with England is not Kane, and that's maybe where Gary Lineker was a little bit unfair to single out the captain. You've got Trippier playing on the wrong side. That's a problem. You've got Foden out wide because Bellingham's through the centre. That's been a problem. You've got Trent Alexander in central midfield. That's been a problem. And it looks like Conor Gallagher is now going to come in his place tomorrow. So there's a number of different problems. And maybe the criticism should be more against Gareth Southgate and the tactics and the selection as far as the starting 11 is concerned. But it was all on Kane. I think Kane handled it, as we just heard, relatively well. He was respectful towards Lineker, but he made his point, and there was that little dig, wasn't there, at the end, that it's not just this generation that haven't won anything. If you go back to Lineker's generation, they didn't win a major tournament either.
Although you, of course, very kindly paraphrased using the correct grammar. Of course, he said haven't won nothing, which would mean that they've won lots of things. But should we get back to
all right, smarty pants.
Yeah, I love a double negative. But clearly England is not performing perhaps in the way that we would like to see. What do they need to do? What does England need to change in order to having a shot at actually finally winning a trophy?
Well, I think Gareth Southgate needs to be bold with some of the younger players, Cole Palmer or Anthony Gordon potentially coming into the fray. And then Trent Alexander-Arnold in midfield hasn't worked so far, so that's why Conor Gallagher's going to come in. If Luke Shaw can get fit, that solves the left-hand side, and then England will be absolutely fine. But what makes the game against Slovenia so important is that they have to win the group, because if they're the Group C winners, then they face one of the best third-place finishers, still to be determined as far as the maths. But what we know now for sure is if they finish second in the group, they face the host Germany. And on current form, the likelihood is they'll go crashing out the tournaments in the last 16.
Ben, is there not a football code, like an unwritten manual of how you should behave when it comes to current footballers, i.e. not slagging each other off, particularly during a international tournament? Surely that should be, an unwritten rule. Just keep your harsh opinions to yourself.
Yeah, it's a fair point, but in this age of social media, and in addition to that, television channels with editorial standards have to ask meaningful questions and, in addition, have that debate. And I think some people that are pundits go down the line of making headlines, but that's not usually Gary Lineker with his analysis on the football side of things, whereas it feels like he really had a direct dig at Harry Kane. And he's entitled to that. I think that it shows that he's not just a pundit, he's an England fan as well. And some pundits struggle with that. Sometimes they want to be opinionated to make a splash. Sometimes they want to be known for their analysis. And sometimes they're just fans and they get caught up in the moment. And maybe that's what happened to Gary Lineker.
Do you think Gary Lineker actually has some sort of personal dislike of Harry Kane? That Harry Kane is obviously held in much higher esteem in the country than Gary Lineker is. Do you think there's perhaps some professional jealousy there?
I mean, not in football terms. I think Gary Lineker and Harry Kane are up there, and I think as footballers, they respect each other. So I don't think there's any agenda against Harry Kane. I think from Lineker's point of view, they've both come through the same domestic path as well through Spurs. So there's a lot of synergies there, and there is that mutual respect. And it's kind of interesting how Lineker says with Kane, he has to get more involved in the game, which means dropping deeper. But Lineker's game was basically a goal hanger. He did all of his business within the box. So they're not like for like profiles. You can't really be jealous generationally. There's a big gap between them. I think Gary Lineker was speaking more as an England fan, and as a result, his comments were passion-driven, and you can understand why the England camp are entitled to their response.
Yes, to be fair, lots of England fans have been extremely vocal about what they think about England's performance so far. So perhaps, yes, if we take Gary Lineker's comments as just an England fan, then it's pretty normal. Thank you so much, Ben Jacobs, sports journalist from Germany.
Well, that's it for us today. Of course, we're back here from this shiny new desk tomorrow, but don't go anywhere. Martin Daubney next.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome along to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Warm and sunny for many places today, but it's not gloriously sunny everywhere. There's still quite a bit of cloud in some locations. High pressure is delivering high temperatures. The cooler air is out behind this weather front. That is slowly creeping towards us, but generally staying away through the rest of today. As I said, though, it's not sunny everywhere. Quite a bit of cloud over South Wales, Southwest England, parts of the Midlands, and a bit more cloud bubbling up further east as well. But generally, it's pretty warm. Nothing exceptional, just compared to June so far. Some of the highest temperatures in the southeast, 27, maybe 28 Celsius. Many other areas, pretty pleasant actually, if you like it warm, in the low 20s, 23 to 25 Celsius. Staying fine.